Good afternoon. It is Thursday, May 4th. This is the Education and Culture Committee. We are here to take up 4 items. 2 are CIP amendments for the library refurbishment level of effort and the Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center. And then we will have 2 MCPI items, a follow-up or third budget session on the operating budget, and a special appropriation for educational support professionals. So we're going to take the CIP amendments first, and so I'll turn it over to Ms. Chen to start with the libraries. And good to see our folks from libraries.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Chen, Legislative Analyst with the County Council. I would just like to say that we have pulled the millions of viewers today for capital amendment. So can we just give a round of applause for libraries and Wheaton Arts, please? Because that's impressive. I'm impressed. Today we'll be discussing great amendments that are coming through on the fiscal year 23 to 28 capital improvements program. One is on the library refurbishment level of effort. The state will be giving us $555,600 to support the Long Branch Library Building and Site Improvement Project, which then allows the county to save $500,000 in GO bonds and repurpose back to the library branch project itself. In addition, the state has also committed $500,000 to the Damascus Library and Senior Center. That is a total of $1,056,000. And today we are recommending that we accept this state funding.
One of my favorite jobs, accepting state funding. I always say it. And as Director Vassallo knows, and our new lead for libraries knows, Long Branch Library is my home library, and Damascus Library and Senior Center is such a great place that really is a hub for that community. So we couldn't be making 2 better investments with state dollars at kind of different ends of our county, opposite ends of our county. So Director Vassallo, do you have anything you want to add before we tell you yes?
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando, and hello to Councilmember Mink, Councilmember Albernaz. The 2 projects that will be supported by this funding are improvements to the exterior space at the Long Branch Library to include a shade structure, which is under design for the plaza/roof, and some other exterior improvements, including the addition of electricity to allow for hot desking, some other items also. The design is underway for the shade improvements, and several different options will be presented to the community for their perusal, and then we will move forward with that. And of course, as you mentioned, the refurbishment of the Damascus Library brings us basically to the end of our cycle of refreshing all of our library buildings, with the exceptions of the ones that needed full replacement. So we're very happy to have this money from the state. It definitely supports our projects, and thank you for your attention to this.
Thank you. It's really exciting. So without objection, and if colleagues don't have any comments, we'll accept those and move them forward to full council. So thank you for joining us. So whoever's here for the Wheaton Arts Cultural Center, you're right there. All right. Let's go to that one.
Our second item on the agenda is amendment to the fiscal year 23 to 28 capital improvements program for the fiscal year 24 capital budget, Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center. Another wonderful announcement that the state will be giving or awarding Montgomery County and GO bonds $1 million. This allows actually the interior build out of the Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center to be accelerated. We did meet previously about the timeline, so we will actually, the facility's interior will be starting faster than when we last met. In addition, that will also allow for the affordable housing piece of the Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center to also move forward ahead. So the recommendation here is to, yes, accept the $1 million in GO bonds from the state of Maryland in order to amend the capital budget.
Thank you. Any comments there? All right, without objection, we're excited about this project. We talked about it in a previous session, so let's accept that and we'll move forward. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay. The easy part of our day. So I'll make some comments and we'll welcome our speakers up for MCPS, President Silvestri, Dr. McKnight, anyone else from your team that's going to be a part of the initial presentation. Yeah, come on up. Yeah. And just to orient everybody, this is our third session on the MCPS operating budget, and we will, at the conclusion here, we'll make a recommendation from the committee on the operating budget for the full council, which will take it up, I think it's on the 12th? Yeah, next week at the full council. And we will bring up, we have our union partners here, and when we get to the staffing part of our the packet, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to make a couple remarks here. We're going to have MCPS, President Silvestri and Dr. McKnight make a brief remarks and do a brief presentation. They have promised me they will be done within 15 minutes. And then we will move on to the packet. Ms. McGuire will walk us through the packet. And when we get to staffing, I'm going to ask to do some musical chairs and bring up our union partners so that they can be present as representatives of the staffing of our school system. So just that's the order. And then obviously we will pause throughout the packet and colleagues will have questions and thoughts as well. So a reoccurring theme in our discussions from our very first ENC meeting has been, one, the need to make sure our schools, students, staff, and really our communities have the resources they need to make sure every student can thrive. A particularly important task as we've come out of a historic period the last 3 years where learning has not only been interrupted, but families have lost loved ones, and we have lost jobs, and certainly student learning and mental health, which is in a crisis level right now, has been all a part of that. We've had opioid increases with our youth and unfortunate overdoses. We're dealing with stuff that we've really never dealt with at this level, and that's the way we've had to enter this budget conversation to say, and I know the school board and the superintendent work together to deliver us a budget and the county executive that addresses those issues. There probably are millions watching at home today, and we have many in the room, and just want to remind everyone in the room, you're welcome to stay and stand, but there is an overflow room on the 4th floor where you can watch the proceedings happening in real time if you'd like to do that at any point. My colleagues and I on the ENC committee, we're committed to making sure that our schools have what they need to thrive. We're going to talk about that today from pre-K all the way through J, as President Silvestri and many others say. But we're also committed to the second theme of making sure that all cell phones are off. or on vibrate. No, that's not the second theme. We're committed to a robust, transparent, and accountable system. You know, this is half of our budget. The recommendation we make today is for half of the county's budget. And while we will have discussion points on how much will be more over last year and that, it will be half of the budget, roughly. And that's important. We need to make sure that our residents who are paying into this system get the high quality and benefit and transparency about what's going on and input into the process. And that's our responsibility as the fiduciary, the ones who have been elected to help decide how to spend taxpayer money in benefit of all residents. And it's an important responsibility that we take very seriously. And that's why I sent a letter to Dr. McKnight when we first started this process, that we're going to be very focused on what is working, what's not, and what are you doing to change it, and what are these accountability measures in a data-based way, because we need to be making data-informed decisions, particularly when resources are so precious and our families are struggling, you know, across the county. So that's how we've entered this process, and we're looking forward to completing it today. Just the last thing I'll say about the reconciliation process. We will make a recommendation. Any recommendation we make under what we've done this year under the budget process, under the council president's request, Everything above last year's budget will go on the reconciliation list, either as a priority, as a high priority, and the council will decide ultimately, as a body, what makes it off that list. So this is our step in the process of making that recommendation. We've been tasked also in trying to find reductions, obviously difficult task, but something that's important. So with that, I will turn it over to President Silvestri for comments, and then Dr. McKnight, you'll take us comments and then through the presentation. And it is 1:27, and I'm going to start my clock. So at 1:45, I'd like to be, no, I'm going to start with you. But I'm giving President Silvestri at least 2.5, 3 minutes. But at 1:45, we're going to be moving on to the packet. President Silvestri.
Good afternoon, Chair Joando, Councilmember Mink, Councilmember Albornoz. It's a pleasure to be here with you once again to take on this very important discussion about our MCPS budget. You have very hard decisions to make, and I recognize that. And we all have the same goal. We are all here because we want to give our students the best that they deserve, because they're counting on us to create an environment and provide the resources so they can achieve at the highest levels. As I thought about what I was going to say to you today, I thought, what can I tell them that they don't already know? You already know that the need is great, both academic and our families who are struggling, and 43% of our students living in poverty. You already know about the youth mental health crisis that continues, and we must address these needs as well as the academic. You already know that we are good stewards of our funding. Mr. Hull has shared with you how we have received commendations from external auditors on our financial reporting. You already know the board is committed to transparency and accountability. We have outlined the measures that we are taking to be accountable, and we are willing and happy to work with you on additional accountability going forward. You already know that we are a people organization. We need our staff. We cannot operate and fulfill our mission without them. For this, we need to fully fund compensation, and we need that state allocation to make that happen. As you already know, our staff need the resources to make improvements in our schools and to be accountable to you. We need these resources to make it happen. As you already know, the ESSER money is already allocated for key interventions such as summer school, tutoring, and mental health. As you already know, the blueprint requires and will continue to require for local spending to achieve the necessary reforms. Again, I recognize these are hard decisions that we are making for both our county and our school system. But we must invest in our students, just like we have invested in our students in the past. We all want the best for them, and I am confident that we will do right by them today. Thank you again for your continued support.
Thank you, President Silvestri. Dr. McKnight.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So good to see you, and I woke up this morning thinking, how am I going to say everything in 5 minutes of the 15 minutes that we're allotted? And much like President Silvestri just said, today was more about the things that you already know and more about what is it that we're going to do. However, over the last few meetings, there have been a few things that I thought I needed to clarify. And as the work that you do, I'm reading what people are saying, and I know that everyone's watching, and I'm trying to figure out what that means. And then I'm left with some of the things that I've heard throughout our discussions. Trust is the first one. That's at the top of the list of my core values. I remember we were talking about fund balance, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And Councilmember Mink, you said trust us. I want you to trust us as well. I promise you, if there were dead bodies laying around CESE, I would probably not be working there. Okay? Secondly, my board members were elected by the constituents in this county to serve the needs of every child that is in the school system. And they hold me and this system and all of our employees accountable for that. We are here now. I cannot account for the sins of the past. I cannot account for the perceptions that were developed around narratives that did not make people feel comfortable or trust this school system, quite frankly, that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over a long time period. But myself, the staff, and the board members, we are here now, and we're here today, and we believe it is our moral responsibility to address the needs of this very diverse school system that needs our attention in a way that it's never been felt before in the history of public education and right here in Montgomery County Public Schools. So we started talking about a three-legged stool. That was the best analogy we could come up with in terms of the things that are important. First leg, employee compensation. We cannot do anything without well-qualified, supported staff who are committed to meeting the needs of our students. Then I think about the second leg, accelerators, and what's this thing? Inflation, okay? Inflation. I mean, you know it, outside of the school system. We're paying much more in the grocery store. We're paying much more in places than we ever paid before, and the school system has to pick that dime up. We have to do it, and we're supposed to do it. And when I think about enrollment growth, those are students who are going to be real-life students who come into our schools, and we must serve them. How can we not prepare for that? And then when I think about the accelerators, it truly is what we have to equip our staff to have in order to make the difference in students' learning that you, the public, and everybody require that we do, and that we know we must do. So it's very difficult to answer the question, what can we do without? To really give ourselves a fair shot and chance at what we are responsible for doing. I want to touch on the fund balance for just a moment. There's been a lot of conversation about the fund balance. And I have to say, it really is a conduit to us having cash on hand to manage fiscal and end-of-the-year responsibilities. And I don't know what the fund balance has meant for MCPS in the many years that has caused many questions, but I'm going to give you a real example that we all felt. COVID-19. So we were at the county building on a day in March, listening to the governor and the state superintendent thinking that we were going to be out of school for 2 weeks. That turned into over a year. We activated immediately, and I'm so grateful for our associations. I'm telling you, it's 2 weeks I'll never forget in my entire life. I believe we were on Zoom and the phone from morning to night, including weekends, nonstop, only got up to use the restroom and to eat. If that makes any sense. It was something. I'll never forget it. Because we had to figure it out because we knew in Montgomery County we were going to have to deliver education for our children. So we went to schools and got all the technology that we could because we knew we needed that technology, right, to be able to meet the needs of students. And then what happened? We then find out that with the technology, our students who did not have access to internet still could not get a public education. Did we budget for any of that? No. Had no idea this was coming. But did we have time to work through a process to go and do this and plan for this? No, we had to stand up education in 2 weeks. And of course, later, everybody came, ABC World News, everyone, to ask us, what did you do and how were you able to stand up education in 2 weeks? And so we proudly shared the story and learned so much from it. It wasn't perfect, but we felt that responsibility. That's who we are. So when I think about fund balance and how it does provide for circumstances that we don't plan for, that's an example. And having a large organization that requires we be astute to that and be prepared for what we don't see coming, that really speaks to it. And I also want to add, the federal rescue funds that came, they didn't come in 2 weeks. They didn't come in a month. They didn't come in 2 months. We had to figure out internally how we were going to address all of those needs and immediately. So as we continue to think about how it is that we utilize our fund balance and real life experiences of why it's important, that's one that I leave you with because I know for me it'll never be forgotten. And our community in many ways depended on the school system for even beyond education, for internet access, for food, and a number of other resources. And the second example we'll talk about is Blueprint. You all know Blueprint well. One of our former beloved county executives, Ike Leggett, chairs the board for the Blueprint. And I'm proud of it because every time they speak about it, they say it's the North Star for public education in Montgomery County. And I'll say he stands with pride in meetings that I'm sitting in with him and says, and I'm expecting MCPS to really implement this in a way being the largest school system in the state. And we're ready to fulfill that charge. We absolutely are. And how are we going to do that when it is, quite frankly, a legislation that does not cover all of the mandates that it requires? And Mr. Hull's going to talk about that in just a moment, but we still have the responsibility to cover the fiscal impact of the Blueprint. And it doesn't all happen in July 1 or November. In many cases, we're learning as we go when we're expected to implement, and we have to be prepared to fund it. And we have to do that. Why? Because we are Montgomery County Public Schools. I am sitting here as a superintendent of a district that I believe in, that I know is expected to lead in many different ways. But I have to have the resources in order to do it, and my staff, we have to have the resources to do it. And so that slide, the three-legged stool, if you can bring that up, it's really all about the importance of balance and the need that has to represent the balance. And when we look at that, I'll say, one, it's about fair and necessary compensation for staff, which I already said. Now, if we compensated our staff as we should for the respected professionals that they are, that quite frankly we should have done a long time ago, but then we don't give them the resources that they need to do the work that they need to do to raise math scores, to improve literacy, then what exactly are we being held accountable for? I don't understand how we pay them, but we then don't give them the things that they need to do the job. We have to do that. They go together. And I already talked about real students in seats. The enrollment, when you think about enrollment, I'm thinking about the speech that I gave, What's Going to Be Our Legacy, a couple of weeks ago, and I thank you for being there, for being present and acknowledging that. But when I look at that box of enrollment, our students are coming to us with so many more needs that we haven't been funded for in the correct rate over a decade. Are we going to ignore what their needs are? So I have to tell you, it's tough. And I know you have a tough decision to make. But I have full confidence in you, I have to tell you, because you were there, two of you, and welcome, Ms. Mink, during COVID-19, one of the toughest times that we had to work through. And here's another tough time. But we're at a crossroads. And I cannot fairly answer the question what it is that we can do without. Yesterday, I was interviewing a principal in MCPS. She asked me a question, which I loved. What are you most excited about? As superintendent, what are you thinking about? You know what I told her? That my son is going to be educated in the school system. I can't tell you how excited I am about that. Because I believe in the staff in the school system. I believe in the vision in the school system. That theory of action, all of the things that we have around the pathways to college, career, and community readiness, I believe in it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't, I promise you. And I know he's going to benefit from that. And that's not just my voice. That's the voice of all the parents, MCC-PTA, NAACP, Black and Brown Coalition, 1977-2. Everybody, if I continued, I'd be here probably for another 15 minutes longer than I know I'm going, Councilmember Jawando. But I've spent time with this community, and they have said we have needs, and they're all different. And we have a responsibility to meet those needs, and we want to. When I think about the accelerators, I am thinking about the specific conversations we've had with all of those groups, and I can point to the accelerators that will further what they're saying. And then I reflect on the speech when I asked the question, what legacy are we going to leave, right? Because if we really want to close the gaps, increase opportunity and access for all children, because we haven't done that, regardless of race, regardless of economic status. that is not done in a way that does not require fiscal investment. And now more than ever. Today we're going to talk about some of the things that have come up that we've had to design in the school system as a result of the pandemic. And it's a different school system, and it should be. I'm excited about where we're going. But we've got to have the funding to do it. And I'm just going to end with the accountability piece. I think it's important. When the board hired me in this role, I said, so here's the thing about me as a person, and here's what you're going to get from me as the Virgo, as the Monifa McKnight, as the consistent person I know to be. And that is, before you begin to hold me accountable about the things that I need to do, it's already going to start with me, every single time. And so as I think about the board and myself, and we've worked through some really difficult times, we've had the conversation about accountability. And we spent a lot of time drafting out all types of things that refine for us what accountability means at this day and time in Montgomery County Public Schools. And we've done that work proudly. And I have to say, we're not the only ones, right? Just to give us a few strong, comprehensive examples of what's been done over the past 12 months to address all these conversations of accountability. And it's not even all. I just want to name a few. We have the Council's Office of Legislative Oversight independent reports. That's always existed. And we talked about the opportunity to be able to strengthen that. That's one. We have an ongoing compliance with the Office of the Inspector General, who now has hired staff specifically for Montgomery County Public Schools. That's new, a whole nother layer of accountability. We have audits from the Maryland State Department of Education, as well as reports from independent external auditors, and many I've required since I've come. We have monthly reports that go to the Board of Education and that also come to the County Council every month, outlining exactly where the money is and what we're doing with it. We have a comprehensive blueprint implementation plan that we have submitted to the AIB, which is the board that Mr. Leggett chairs, to talk about what our plan is and how we look to fund the blueprint. We have upgraded a formal program evaluation system to help determine whether to continue to move a program forward, stop implementing it, or proceed with caution. That's new. We have continuous progress monitoring to systematically look at early signs of success and warnings when we have to make course correction. New process to be astute to that. We have a program budget that includes inventory of programs that have been organized to demonstrate how the budget is aligned to the strategic plan. We have the strategic plan. We created the pathways to college, career, community readiness and said, based on those milestones and competencies, we want to be accountable to the public. So I'm not sure what else we can do. Because those were things we embraced to say, we acknowledge that this is a community effort and our community should know what's happening, and we want to be able to continue that. So hold us accountable for the future. All of us. Here we are now, and give us a starting chance to actually do it. And not for me, and actually not for all of us in this room, but for the children that we represent.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight, and we're all in this together. We couldn't agree more. So I was told there's 7 slides. How many can we skip?
So I actually don't have any slides.
Okay.
I've just got a few comments, and I'll run through them quickly here. So I want to thank the superintendent and the board president and just acknowledge all of the folks in this room. The budget that we put forward has been a collective effort of many of the folks in this room, our associations, our community partners, and many, many others. So good afternoon, members of the Education and Culture Committee. My name is Brian Hull, Chief Operating Officer. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to dive a little bit deeper into some of the comments that the superintendent shared and the overall financial picture of MCPS. So I'll bring us, if we can go to the next slide, actually, please. Next slide. One. I was told I was supposed to have this one up. Don't look at the slides. So I'll bring us back to the 3 legs of our budget request. I think we all understand the importance of compensating our teachers, administrators, and support staff, and that accounts for over 2/3 of the budget request. We have reached tentative agreements with all 3 of our association partners on 2-year compensation packages. A key part of this investment is the $70 million in additional state aid that we anticipate receiving for FY24 compared to this year. The revised state aid numbers that we received from MSDE in February allowed us to offer compensation packages that are commensurate with surrounding school districts and the increases that Montgomery County government itself has reached with its association partners. We cannot fully fund these negotiated agreements without the additional state aid. Without this investment, Montgomery County will continue to fall further behind our neighboring school districts who we compete with for the most talented teachers and staff. The second leg of our school is our same services budget, which accounts for enrollment, opening a new school next year, and inflationary increases, so we are prepared to welcome over 2,000 new students to MCPS this fall. Without this funding, we will need to make reductions in services to students. To serve these new students, we are hiring 68 general education teachers, 25 English learner teachers, 85 special education teachers and support professionals, and another 118 staff, just to maintain the services we are providing today. In addition, inflationary costs include $4 million for utilities, $3.8 million for bus fuel, $3 million for non-public placement, among others. Without funding the additional positions or the inflation, we will be offering our new students less than we offer our students today. Finally, our accelerators. These are the key investments that the superintendent and the Board of Education have determined are the most critical for supporting the students' well-being and accelerating learning as our students continue to recover from the lost learning time and social-emotional impacts caused by COVID-19. All of these investments touch the classroom and will provide critical services to the students of Montgomery County. As we discuss our fund balance, it is important for an organization of this size, with a budget of nearly $3 billion, to maintain a fund balance at year end. The $25 million that we have in recent history, agreed with the council to maintain, represents less than 1% of our operating budget and is one of the smallest by percentage in the state of Maryland. Keep in mind, MCPS does not receive our entire funding appropriation from the county, state, or federal government on the first day of the fiscal year. We receive it in several allotments over the course of the year. So maintaining a small fund balance allows for flexibility when managing fluctuations in the timing of cash disbursements and cash flow. Our payroll is around $80 million every 2 weeks, so we need to maintain a reasonable cash balance to meet payroll obligations and unexpected costs. Back in the early 2000s, long before I was around, the council agreed to maintain a fund balance to fund the following year budget. Before that, MCPS twice ended the fiscal year in a deficit. In one case, needing to rely on bank loans to meet our financial obligations. This is not a position that we want to be in. A recent example of this is that July 1, 2022, the first day of this current fiscal year, happened to be a payday, and we had to disperse $57 million for payroll and another $22 million to meet our tax obligations. The fund balance helped us from a cash flow basis to meet these and other expenditure obligations. Using these one-time dollars for reoccurring expenses is not a best practice, because it will mean we will be right back here next year needing to fill that gap. We have worked very hard to avoid budgeting reoccurring expenses on the one-time ESSER funds to avoid this very situation. Maintaining a small fund balance allows the school system that serves over 160,000 students to absorb unanticipated costs, such as the Teacher Choice for Teacher Retention Program that the council funded using MCPS fund balance earlier this year, as well as the superintendent noted, unanticipated blueprint requirements. such as the dual enrollment costs that we heard from that we were notified about from MSDE mid-year, this current year. Finally, it is important also to remember that the county executive's recommended budget is about $8 million short of the Board of Education's budget. If the staff recommendation to cut the MCPS budget by an additional $80 million is adopted, this total will be nearly $90 million in reductions. This will lead to deep cuts in the classroom, potentially raising class sizes, and or renegotiating the contracts that the agreements we have recently reached with our association partners. So I will stop there, say thank you, and turn it over to Dr. Murphy.
Good afternoon, council members. Next slide, please. I'm Pat Murphy. I'm the Deputy Superintendent, and I think we're going to address several of the questions that you have raised. As we all recognize, coming back off the pandemic, many of our social, emotional, and mental health needs only continue to expand. They're a vital part for what our main mission is, and that is our core instruction. So this afternoon, what you'll hear a little bit about, and you've asked questions about, is how those services are deployed, how they're also differentiated, and how they support our total program. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Mr. Damon Monteleone, who will lead us through some of the first two topics with mental health and restorative justice. So, Mr. Monteleone.
And just to, I've allowed a little leeway here, but we're at 2 o'clock. We're moving on, so you got six and a half minutes.
Understood. Thank you. Damon Monteleone, one of the Associate Superintendents in School Support and Wellbeing. So I think just briefly then on the interest around well-being and student mental health, it's clearly still a major issue today. As we've spoken to here in our theme, it's demanded that we've increased the scope of our services for students. And not just the amount of services, but the scope of our services. And we do know, when we think about literacy and math as one leg of that stool, that if our students aren't well when they enter the schoolhouse or when they're in their classrooms, they will not necessarily be ready to learn. And we also know that for many of our students, specifically our students of color, that ability to truly feel well in school is rooted in a sense of inclusion and tolerance, right, and a feeling of safety. And so that's where our anti-racist audit comes in. That's where our focus on equity, that's where our focus on climate and culture come in. But all of our student services, whether it's people personnel workers, social workers, psychological services, counselors, the partnerships we have with HHS through Bridge to Wellness, these are all centered in a new organizing fashion through our student well-being teams. And we've talked a lot about data, we've talked a lot about accountability, and this theme of student well-being. And so through our student well-being teams and a new monitoring tool that we've developed, our MTSS, which has 3 tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, as we elevate through the needs of a student, we can now document who we're seeing, why we're seeing them, the type of intervention that we are deploying, and whether or not it is effective. And if it is not effective, then we are going to move on to something else. We have the data there. It is a data-driven structure. It also provides accountability at the school level, and as we surface up this data from the schools, at the district level. So for the first time moving forward, we will be able to have numbers individually at the school level and the district level to speak to the wellness of our students. It's also there's also a level of accountability through our school improvement plans. Moving forward, we've done revolutionary work with all of our partners in this room to include not just a lit and math goal in our school improvement plans, but also a well-being and culture goal that are data-driven and have accountability at the principal and school-based level as well as the district level. Next slide, please. Restorative justice or restorative approaches continues to be a very, very important part of this, primarily because of what I just spoke to. Our students have to feel safe and they have to feel welcome in school. Many see restorative approaches as something that happens on the back end of a disciplinary issue or happens in lieu of discipline. And frankly, that is really just not the case. It's part of establishing our proactive structures, our processes, and the culture in our schools. And it is supported by the House bill that came out in 2019 from the state legislature, and is also supported really through the RSSW work that came out of the county executive. And that RSSW work included students and staff, HHS members, members of the council, and they made key recommendations for staffing and for stipends and for coaches in buildings and for data to drive this work and to reduce suspensions. And we have deployed those resources through this budget. And where we have put restorative justice specialists specifically at our middle schools, in 9 middle schools that had a large number of suspensions, we have seen those suspensions go down in 7 of those over the course of first semester and remain steady in 1 more. So we are seeing impact through this, and it is also integral to the superintendent's strategic plan and the anti-racist audit.
Let me just
Thank
ask you, so I see
Sure.
you're tracking the issues we're going to discuss in the packet, it
Yep.
seems. Do you have one for special, is compensatory services next? Is that what you're doing right now? So why don't we do this? Why don't we you have like 1 slide per issue, basically?
That's my last slide that you're looking at.
Okay, so let me let you finish then, because I was going to say, we're going to come back, we're going to have these issues talked about in the budget side, and we're going to ask questions on them. So, but go ahead, if you just have one more, go ahead.
Sure, and I mean, I was trying to go through it and speak very quickly and being mindful of time. I would like to say that there was a question the last time I was before you about recidivism, right, for students with that engage in the restorative justice process on the back end. And when we look specifically at violations such as attacks on students, fighting, disrespect, and disruption, and we combine those, there's a 75% rate where students do not repeat those offenses when they engage in that. And we went back and looked at our database. So I did want to make sure that I came forward and share that. That was a request at the last meeting. But given our time and with my colleague, Ms. Wiles, down at the other end of the table, I'll cede to her.
Next slide, please. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Diana Wiles. I'm the Acting Associate Superintendent for the Office of Special Education, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of points for you today. We have been working diligently to ensure that our students who had learning loss and who were eligible for compensatory recovery services as a result of the COVID closures are receiving those services. We continue to provide those services throughout this year and anticipate completing them by the end of the 23-24 school year. Those services are primarily funded through our ESSER funding and some of our local budget. The second point I wanted to highlight, just to elevate what Dr. McKnight stated with regard to the blueprint, is that one of our accelerators speaks specifically to what the blueprint requires for our most students with the most needs in our pre-K programs. We have provided an accelerator so that we can grow the number of students who are in full-time special education programs. We have to grow at the same time as our general education partners so that we can ensure that we are equitable and the students who have the most need, who are the most vulnerable, are receiving the services that they need as soon as possible. So as they transition to school age, they are ready to attack literacy and math with all of the services that we've provided.
Thank you, you get the gold star. We all wanted the gold star back in the day, I remember that. So, okay, thank you so much. And as we go through the packet, if there's other things you would like to say in response to the packet or the questions on those items, please let us know, because we will engage in a dialogue on those. So just to go over, and I'll turn it over to Ms. McGuire, we're going to go over, we've been reviewing basically the whole operating budget and talking at the budgetary items. So the first is the anti-racist audit that we're going to talk about briefly, the restorative justice staffing, which has a budgetary impact, the special education compensatory education, and then there's follow-up, because this is kind of runs through every issue, ESSER, allocation, and the accelerators. And so we'll have time to talk about that. And then the second part of our discussion will be around staffing. And that's why we have our association partners here, then mental health supports, and then our vacancies and long-term substitutes, which we've touched on before. And then we'll talk about the salary schedule. So we have a full packet here, and we'll go through it, and we'll pause. If colleagues have questions, just tap me. And if there's any points that you all want to make, just let us know, and we'll go to you. So I'll turn to you, Ms. McGuire.
Thank you, and if you'd like me to turn the lights on, I can do that as well. Yeah, okay. I'll get started, and then we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I will start then, as you outlined, with the sort of the first section of the packet runs through some of the updates, and there were specific items and areas that the committee wanted to discuss and wanted to understand specifically the budget aspects. The first of those is the anti-racist audit. That section of your packet begins on page 2. MCPS did provide information just regarding the overall implementation, the funding elements beginning in FY21 with the initial allocation to commission the audit, and then, of course, additional work that's occurred since then. The system statement is repeated in your packet on page 2, and really outlines that that there are a variety of implementation strategies to move the work forward, and that the allocations are very dispersed throughout the district. And so that really is, again, sort of I think the heart of the response and of the indication. From a specific standpoint, the system did identify $4.2 million of professional development funds within the ESSER funding as identified to support implementation of that aspect of the anti-racist audit in FY24. So that's, again, sort of the specific line item that's been identified in addition to the more disparate funding elements that were referenced.
Any more context on the we're going to have an in-depth session on the anti-racist system audit and what's going to happen and what actions you're taking. But anything did you wanted to add on that? Anyone? You don't have to.
No, definitely. This is exciting work. I definitely want to add, we are providing a full board presentation on May 11th next week that's going to share the comprehensive action plan. But just a couple things to note. While the anti-racist audit report came out in October, we have not been just sitting, not doing any action since October. So since October, and we did put out a public message around this, you can check out our audit website in order to get more information. But since October, we have engaged in 16 community conversations where we have unpacked the anti-racist audit with our community stakeholders to help inform the action plan. We have unpacked the report and began action planning with all central service and school-based leaders. This includes professional learning that started in February for all school-based leaders around this work, as well as all central services leaders. And another part of this was at all of the domains of the anti-racist audit, because there are 6 areas of the audit. We have developed charters or work groups that have been working all year on designing the action plan to really show measurable and specific change that is going to be happening for our system as a whole. And in the schools, we've been working on the revamping of the school improvement planning process and the community engagement portion of that in particular, and also working with school leaders to specifically unpack their individual school data around the anti-racist audit so they could implement that in their action planning process through the school improvement plan. So all of that has already been started. We're going to share a more comprehensive action plan next week. And I do want to also note that the true work of the anti-racist audit implementation it's not the anti-racist audit and everything else. This is truly the work of the system across all systems, and it's really a focus on how we change the way that we're doing our work for the benefit of kids.
Dr. McKnight, did you
Yes, I just wanted to add, and bringing it back to the budget that is in front of you, we've done a deep dive and some research in MCPS to really look at where do we actually start to see the separation of children happen within the district? And when I say separation, I'm meaning opportunity and access, right? That then creates the gap that we then spend so much trying to figure out how do we close it, narrow it. And so there's an investment in one of our accelerators that really focuses on these achievement specialists who are staff already in schools, but one of their responsibilities is to actually monitor along with the staff and the leadership team how students are doing within that school who are students who over time have not done well. We know that at this district level, we have the responsibility for monitoring that, and we're going to see that clearly and openly in our pathway to college, career, and community readiness. But how powerful is it that we start that conversation in the middle school? Because we've identified that's when we start to see many of the gaps continue to build. But to have eyes in the schools to say, when we look at the performance of our farm students, our farms Latino students, our farms African American students, and in some cases non-farm African American, Latina, and Asian students when they are not performing? What is happening so that we can be responsive to it right at that time? And that's important to us, and we identified that as one of our measures to really focus on when we talk about being an equitable school system, because one, that has to come alive in student learning, and two, then when they get to high school, we're not trying to chase down a problem that had 3 years to develop when they were in middle school. So I just wanted to share that with you because I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the budget with the Board of Education, but that is one specific example of something that's in our budget that addresses the anti-racist audit.
I appreciate that. And I just want to say, and I'll turn to my colleague, Councilman Rink, in one moment, I'm just proud that we're doing this work. There's so many places around the country that are literally don't want to even mention these words and don't want to take the time and the effort that is required to be anti-racist. I will remind people that being anti-racist does not mean the person is a racist person. It means our actions at any given moment can have a racist impact. And I'll use my life story as example. When I was an elementary student in MCPS, and some teachers thought when I was raising my hand I was being disruptive, and others teachers treated it as a positive, wanting to engage in the class. And we know, for example, that black boys, black children, children of color, students with disabilities, we have been socialized to believe that they have certain traits with them, right? And they can be subconscious. And I think it takes work and vigilance to work against that. It's not a values judgment about any person. It's just that we need to understand how this country was built and the systems and structures that are in place and be intentional about working against them so every child can learn. And so it's not going to be an easy process because it's not an easy thing. We didn't get here easily. But I just want to say we're going to be working with the school board and the system on this. It's an important effort, and I'm glad that you're continuing with it. And it's going to be an ongoing and long-term important effort. Councilmember Mink.
Being here today, thanks for this really critical conversation. And just wanted to add that, work like this, the anti-racist audit, as we're looking at student achievement and where we want what we want for our students and for our community, and for the success that we want our kids to have, that work like this is truly fundamental. This is not a nice to have that we're layering on top of, math classes and so on. It's important, I think, that everybody understands that this is a need to have, that this type of work, undoing decades, centuries of issues that have, it takes a lot of, it's going to take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of very conscious and intentional work. And if we don't do it consciously and intentionally, we're not going to fix the problem. We're not going to see the achievements that our students deserve. We're not going to see, all of the opportunities, all of the doors being open to all of the students in the ways that they need to be. So I very much appreciate, as Chair Jawando said, that we are going into this with full eyes open. And also just wanted to clarify or ask about, in addition to anti-racist work, we of course know that transphobia and hatred around the LGBTQ+ community, that is an issue that we have seen rearing its ugly head nationally, but also we've even seen it here in Montgomery County. And we have talked about how the anti-racist audit does provide a useful roadmap as we think about addressing some of those issues as well. And so I just wanted to clarify whether is that bucket of work going to be formally made a part of the implementation of the recommendations of the anti-racist audit, including, using the ESSER funds for professional development, things like that, or is that, a separate bucket of work that we should be thinking about how we're going to be, addressing over the coming year or two, or how are you all thinking about that, and how is that reflected in the budget?
Ms. Sharon, I saw you reaching, so that means you probably have some detail to add on to this. But it's all of it. So the anti-racist audit was established to address the fact that there needs to be a sense of belonging for every child in Montgomery County Public Schools. And so we've been very upfront about where is it that we see our children who are being vulnerable. And we see areas beyond race. And so we know that even though we're addressing this through a race lens perspective, because historically that's where we've seen over time the most separation and most desperate variance among students. We also see it as an opportunity to also aid in that sense of belonging, who else is vulnerable and how do we address their needs. And then there's a significant body of work that's being done, and the office's name is not coming to mind right now. I'm thinking about Greg Edmondson. Is he here? Thank you, student welfare. Our student welfare office has really taken on the big charge of actually involving our students and our staff in what it is that our students who are LGBTQ plus needing, and what are actually some of the more silent biases that exist in spaces for them, and informing and working and professionally developing our staff to be able to identify that, and most importantly, care for those students, so that we're not just dealing with the out front biases that, you know, everyone can see, but being more thoughtful about and hearing from them, what are the things that are not so intentionally seen and heard that present a very uncomfortable space for them in the schools, which again, all contribute to the sense of belonging. So that Office of Student Welfare have definitely been involved with the anti-racist audit and taking work that's done there in that space to also address the needs of our students. And that can
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then also wanted to ask you about, okay, so we're using ESSER funding for professional development as related to the anti-racist audit. Some of the work that we're doing related to the audit is going to be stuff where, you know, we find areas that we need to fix, we're going to put those measures in place, they're fixed, and now they're not going to be a budget item anymore. Some of them are going to be things where we need to be providing ongoing training, for example, you know, for staff as they're coming in. And so I'm looking particularly at, as we're using ESSER funding for professional development, those costs, I would assume, are going to decrease over time because we want to get everybody trained up and then gradually, but we're going to need to train folks who are coming in as well. Did you want to speak to that also? Because I'm just thinking about some of this is, you know, is fine that it's state funds and that it's going to be gone eventually, but some of it we're going to need to think about being very thoughtful about assessing what are the things that we need to find, obviously using database means to decide, but that we are going to need to find some kind of county budget space down the line for.
Absolutely. One part of the work that we do, and we're doing this really in looking at ESSER funding because it's allowed us to create spaces that we didn't have exist before. And so we've been thinking about what needs to be created that's a part of our foundation now, like the simple example is the Virtual Academy, right? And how do we build that structure into our base budget to make sure that we know that's something that will continue because it's just a part of the future and one that creates opportunity and access. But the training, I must say, is a component that we've been planning for the past 2 years in Montgomery County Public Schools. And that is so while we've been able to provide more immediate and needed training for needs, like for instance, our staff in using technology, how they utilize technology since they were required to do more of that since COVID-19. That was an immediate training that's needed. Training around the results of the anti-racist audit, immediate training that's needed. However, we have had a long history of training in Montgomery County Public Schools in which we're saying, now how are we going to infuse all of this training, like from the anti-racist audit, in avenues that already exist? For example, every year we know we have a certain amount of training designated for new staff and new teachers in Montgomery County Public Schools. That's already there. So then it is how do we move into those spaces and utilize the professional development that we know still needs to be in front of our staff in those spaces. We have a certain amount of professional learning days that's always committed to staff during the summer. I would say moving forward, of course, we know this is going to be a priority of ours. That training is already there and accounted for. Now we're just moving the content of the training into structures that already exist. So that is the nice runway for us to be able to continue the work that does not require the level of funding that we've had the flexibility to use, but that we have been able to use in these circumstances that need immediate attention.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I'm sure this will be a theme that we return to, considering the ESSER funding situation and the transitions we're going to have to make. And it's great to hear you being thoughtful about, like, yeah, here's the stuff we're actually not going to need a lot of extra budget space on the county side, so that we can make sure that that we're really on the same page when it comes to the things that we are going to need to find, county budget for. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to the restorative justice.
Thank you. So MCPS did provide the information on the bottom of page 3 of your packet regarding the current year budget elements supporting restorative justice efforts both centrally and in schools. Comparison with the prior year. MCPS does also state that the FY24 funding would continue these efforts, and also that the ESSER 3 information indicates that the funding for the restorative justice specialist positions is included in the ESSER 3 allocation. And so what you have here is the $1.1 million for 9 instructional specialists. That's the central office supports. And then there's $1.2 million for stipends for local schools, and that breakout follows below. And so my understanding is that the instructional specialists, again, are supported from ESSER funding.
Thank you. And I know we had a brief presentation from you, Mr. a couple of minutes ago, but I have a couple of questions on this. One, obviously, we had a joint ENC public safety meeting. Appreciate you bringing back the fact that was I will make sure Councilmember Katz hears that. I think it was his question about how many of those who have gone through a restorative justice practice after having some sort of conflict are, what's the recidivism rate? You said 75% do not, I think is what I heard.
Yeah, that was for those conflicts, incidents, where are they here? Yeah, for attack on student, fighting, disrespect, and disruption, for those.
And appreciate that. You know, this is a proven and important practice. It connects to the anti-racist work, obviously. It takes, every study I've read, it takes 3 to 5 years for this to be implemented with fidelity. You mentioned you are ranking at our previous session, bucketing the schools of how far along they are in our 211 in this process. So my kind of general question, with this increase in instructional specialists, in the stipends, what is our pathway, kind of high level, to full adoption in the system? You know, what do you see from a budgetary standpoint in particular, the need to get there over the next couple of years? Yeah, okay.
I'm ready when you are, Mr. Monteleone.
Okay, I mean, if you were going to take it. I can speak.
Can I speak to the future of that a little bit, just for a second before he goes in that? Because I think some of it is what we're doing right now and planning within the system, and Mr. Monteleone is going to address that. But one of the things that we've learned during the pandemic that I want to highlight is when we've been able to look at the past and how we support positions such as this, what we haven't acknowledged is some of the support that we actually have in our community, where relationships already exist that the school system can, quite frankly, leverage. Like I saw a number of our faith-based partners that are here today, a number of our advocacy groups that are here today. And when we think about mental health and support, I see it beyond just the school. So one of our thoughts, and we've been planning on this, is as we continue to think about how we continue to provide support for students in the era moving forward, how are we able to build some of those partnerships that doesn't require just in the basis of staffing, but more relationship building of services from our community members that actually have an interest in many of these same areas. And I called out our faith-based and some of the organizations that were developed during the pandemic, because so many of them came together to just meet the needs of the community. And many of them, in certain ways, were offering services that weren't even required, to be funding for the school system. So I think that's a great avenue that we have moving forward in front of us, and saying, what do we have that will allow us to continue to meet those needs? I know we're talking about a budget that is a historic one now, thinking about the needs, but I'm so glad you asked that question, and your question around what are we doing for the runway of services earlier, Councilmember Mink, because we are thinking about that right now, and not expecting that we will just have this level of funding coming through the system, but truly planning for the future and thinking about what are other ways for us to use resources that are available to us outside of some of these traditional ways, but more innovative approach.
So speaking just high level about what is this going to take to move forward, and then speaking to the budget. So through that implementation guide, the state of Maryland, in 2019, we got this charge. Clearly, we went through the pandemic. It was just this past fall the state of Maryland put out a template of guidelines for how schools should assess their implementation. we had actually been in the process of developing that. And once we got the state guidelines, we melded those together, and we were able to do an assessment of all of our schools second semester. And so out of those schools, we have 10% are reactive, 64 are, meaning 10% or 20 schools really haven't gotten off the ground, to be honest with you. 64 are in early adoption phases. We have 23 intermediate, and then 3 that are model schools. But this right here, and the fact that we have a dedicated coach in every single school, and we have the 9 specialists that support all of our schools, is really at the cutting edge, the forefront of the state of Maryland. There are some districts that are saying we're not even going to really start this work for another year, for another 2 years. So we are leading the state. And this does speak to the spirit and the charge that Dr. McKnight has given us to put MCPS back at the cutting edge of this work. In terms of next steps, one of the areas that we have been focused on as restorative justice relates to disproportionality of suspensions and not keeping students out of the learning environment is what we're referring to as the 4 core, really alternatives to suspensions, which we will be bringing forward through trainings and other modules to our school staff this year. And I won't go into detail, but shadowing, right? Instead of a suspension, we're going to have a parent come in and shadow their student throughout the course of the day. Mini courses, if a student says something or does something because of ignorance or because they're a child and that it is hateful or it is racist, it's anti-Semitic, that we're applying appropriate discipline, but we're also educating that student as to why this is not right and to restore them and bring them back into the community. Learning projects along the same line, or to do research, to self-investigation in this area. And then also service learning, right? Being able to give back to the community, and this would have been something, maybe it's graffiti or vandalism or something along those lines. Beyond that, we know that we have to better engage our parents in the process. We know that we have to be more transparent about what the process map looks like on the front end in terms of creating those environments, what those environments are supposed to look like, and how we know and what data we use, but also how we are clear on if an incident does occur, how the student is voluntarily accepts to be a part of it, how the parent is notified and engaged in writing to be a part of this, and that we ultimately are going to bring the student back into the school environment. So we're really excited. Through this study, we are now, for the first time, able to have a landscape view of where the district is, and we know where work is to be done for individual schools. And I go back to what we talked about in terms of data and accountability. The data is there. We use quantitative data through our referral numbers, through our suspension numbers, and through our anti-racist audit and local school climate surveys. That's quantitative data, right? We have the observational data and the self-evaluation data through that implementation rubric that we are currently using. So this allows us to look at individual schools to see where we need to move the needle a little bit and partner with our school supervisory directors and associates and funnel that work once again through that school improvement plan and link it to the goals that I mentioned earlier. And this is key. That's how we hold schools accountable. And when we hold schools accountable, that's how we hold ourselves accountable as a district.
Appreciate that.
I can speak to the numbers in the budget if you'd like as well.
Yeah, that I was going to say, the core of the question of, so you're adding 3 specialists this year is proposed. What's the ramp up to get to the point, what you just described, where we're meeting the needs of, so what will it be next year?
So it's the same. So we're in looking at next year's budget, we have those 3 instructions. 3 out of the 9 are on the local budget, okay? And that comes out to about $500,000 in those salaries. What also is on the local budget are stipends for our secondary schools. And those secondary schools, that's how we provide the coaches. We don't have a restorative justice specialist in every single school, but we have a stipend for a staff member who's passionate about the work and who is part of a district-level professional learning community. So those are the local budgets. Ultimately, we have 6 specialists who are on the ESSER budget, right, that we would need to bring over to the local budget in the future. And the total dollar amount there for those instructional specialists is 1.5, little over 1 point.
And that'll happen you intend to do that, right, over time to next year? I mean, I know the board has to decide, but that's the plan.
As I sit here as the associate superintendent, that is certainly my hope and desire as we continue to provide these services to our students.
Appreciate it.
And I just wanted to add, and yes, that's what the board requested of us, I mean, around the conversation of how we're looking at disparity that exists among different groups of students, and how we're intentionally using those resources to address those disparities in the right places by providing that support. So as Mr. Monteleone talked about the differentiation of resources for specific schools, this is what we've been looking at, and even more so after coming out of I mean, this has been an issue, a longstanding issue, right? When you think about the disproportionality that exists. But we also have to be careful as we're providing that support that we don't widen, right, that disproportionality. And that, I know that's been an interest of the board, down to the point where they've asked us to establish these systems of accountability for how we're using those resources. What's happening with who in specific schools, and how are we monitoring that?
Appreciate that. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thanks, and I know we have a lot to get to, so I'm going to be brief on this. And we are revisiting this in a joint committee session in the next couple of months after the budget's over, so we'll be able to expand on a lot of this conversation. But I did have one question and one follow-up point that follows up on a point that Dr. McKnight made. So what capacity, I'm not sure what the right term is, how many students would this be able to serve in years 1 and then followed by years 2 and 3, with 3 specialists being added and then trying to get up to 9?
So the 9 specialists are, loosely aligned with we break our schools down into 3 separate areas, right? We kind of have a pyramid structure there, but our 9 specialists are aligned to areas of the district. So I was a history teacher, 210 divided by 9, right, is how many schools they have each of them are responsible for, and then we have the coach in every single building. So as a tier 1 support, when we talk about tier 1, something that we do proactively within our culture and with our climate and within our schoolhouse, all students should be benefiting from this. When we talk about specific students, our RJ specialists and coaches, they run groups, they run lunch sessions, they mentor students, they are developing programs within schools for conflict resolution and circles for students to have de-escalation skills. So there are students within the schools, right, that have that tier 2 or that group support. And then certainly there's an additional number of students that have one-on-one support. But I would like to say that last year we put out a mental health survey for our students, and 61,000 of them said that they needed support with communication, conflict resolution, stress, and anxiety. And we believe that these supports go a long way in addressing that.
So you didn't give me a specific number, and we can follow up.
23, I'm sorry. Somebody did the math for me.
Got it. And so just 2 thoughts.
Per specialist.
Per specialist.
23 per specialist. 23 schools per specialist.
Schools per specialist, and then how many, what's an individual caseload look like?
So restorative justice specialists don't have caseloads. Our social workers have caseloads, our counselors have caseloads, and many of our mental health professionals have caseloads. The specialist really serves as a staff or a development teacher, right? They go in and they coach, they work with the administration, they work with the staff development teachers, they work with the curriculum specialists and the teachers to create these learning environments, right, where it's a prerequisite that students feel welcome and warm and included, right? So they really were doing that front-end work to establish the culture in the school. The coaches are there on a daily basis, and they're the ones that facilitate things, say, with individual classrooms. You may go into an elementary classroom, and you can see an elementary teacher starting their homeroom with a circle. We're all going to get in a circle, and we're going to start our day with a positive affirmation. We're going to
I'm good.
Yeah? Okay.
Gotcha. Context. So I think the bottom line is this is all predicated on recruiting coaches within the schools. We have stipends that we're offering. I'll just tell you right now, as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and former colleagues that are in the youth development space and the recreation department, we're struggling, understandably, to recruit teachers to be able to stay after school, to be able to carry out after-school programs, because people are exhausted and the stipends are not enough. And the type of work that we're talking about here goes even further above and beyond emotionally on the teachers who heroically are volunteering for programs like this. So We'll follow up on the overall structure, and the structure makes sense, but in practical reality, is it actually going to be something that we can implement with fidelity? Which takes me to Dr. McKnight's point. Just this morning, in the HHS committee, we approved the continuation of the Youth Harm Prevention Initiative, which was started under the Department of Health and Human Services, which builds off of the work that's being done by the Street Outreach Network and several of our nonprofit providers, including Identity, which are doing really great work. And oftentimes, it's the same students that are receiving these restorative justice programs and initiatives that are being touched by another outside organization. So to your point, Dr. McKnight, that collaboration is critical, and I just want to stress that the county is tackling this not just from the school system's perspective, which is important, but this is one of millions of examples where in partnership we'll be able to get a lot further, and why holistically the budget needs to be looked at as beyond just this, but other investments that we're making in other both nonprofit organizations and the Department of Health and Human Services. But with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and very important point about the workload on our staff that we asked to do these to meet a very important goal, so.
Councilmember Jawando, if I may, we agree with you 100%. 100%. As a matter of fact, it would be our desire to have staff who are full-time focusing on this and to not provide the stipend. Quite frankly, when we talk about the fiscal conservativeness of all of this, the stipends are a quick and less expensive route to try and get services for our students, but that is not our desire. So, if there is any way in which you would like for us to come back and share with the committee a more outward approach for how we can do that beyond the stipend, we are definitely prepared to do so.
Well, we definitely will have a follow-up on this topic, so.
We've got a joint committee, right?
Yeah, we got a joint committee coming up, so, all right, let's move on.
Whoops, sorry, thank you. On the top of page 4 of your packet is the special education compensatory education, which we, again, did touch on briefly. Of course, these are really critical services that the school system is working to provide to make up to the special education students and their families some of the services that were not able to be provided during the COVID pandemic. The table on page 4 of your packet, just a note, this table was revised, folks, if anyone printed their packet before, earlier this week, you might want to double check. The FY24 projected for the local is actually $100,000, so that should be the corrected amount. And this table just shows, again, the allocation of funds being used, primarily ESSER funds, to ensure that these services can be carried forward. MCPS has been working really hard to provide those services and can provide details, but again, this is clearly an important effort.
Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. So I know we talked about this a little bit earlier. I wanted to get a better understanding of the use of the ESSER funds here and what this could look like moving forward post ESSER, if anything. So this is a question related to whether this is a bucket of funds that we can expect to be seeing now used more slowly, the ESSER funds, or possibly not being completely used, or whether it's a program that we might want to shift to funding with county dollars. So you sent over an update that says over half of the students identified for these funds have completed services. And so I wanted to get a better understanding of what that means. Does that mean, like, given this amount of ESSER funding, right, we've split it up amongst these students and we've allocated, we're able to provide with that funding, this much in tutoring or compensatory services. But ideally, given, say, the data coming out of those results, ideally those students would be receiving more of those same services moving forwards to get them to where we need them to be? Or does completed services mean, they had a goal, they reached the goal, and so now they've kind of graduated out of using those funds? And additionally, I'll just give you part 2 of the question also. For the other half who have not completed services, have they begun services? Are we having difficulty reaching them or pulling them into the program? Have they declined services? And so does then that impact the spend down on this bucket of ESSER funds?
So if I neglect to answer any part of that question, because
Yes.
I wasn't writing it
Yes.
down, please tell me. So I want to first start with making a distinction between tutoring and compensatory services. In terms of special education services, compensatory services are not new. Compensatory services are awarded to students where there's been found that student did not receive services that they were entitled to and that there was a harm educationally to the student. So at the tail end of the COVID closures, when we started to come back into the schools, what MSDE required all school systems to do as a result of the U.S. Department of Education's guidance and requirements was to have conversations about every student who was enrolled in your district during COVID closures and determine if they missed services, if there was an educational impact and a harm that would require us to provide them compensatory services. Compensatory services can look like tutoring, but they are not tutoring services. It's specifically related to what students are provided through their individualized educational program. So if I'm a student that has speech and language services and there was not a speech and language pathologist available for a period of time, then those services would be made up through compensatory services outside of the regular school day. So when we say we've completed over half, I say maybe about 2/3 we've completed up to this point. What that means is for that group of students who were awarded X number of hours, you may have been awarded 20 hours of educational services. Dr. McKnight could have been awarded 50 hours for any area where they receive services. That means that we had a teacher who we paid outside of the regular school day to provide those services, or a speech pathologist, or psychologist if you were owed counseling services. The remaining students, a little over 2,000, are students who either we have continued to try to find someone to provide those services in the school district, or where we've provided someone, but there's been some kind of back and forth with the parent in terms of when the services can be offered, because again, it's outside of regular school day. So if the parent is unable, for example, to get the student to the location throughout the county where we're offering the services, or if they can't meet up at a library on Saturday or what have you, then that may push out the time frame to provide those services. As you all know, we have a critical shortage of speech pathologists, special educators. So in some respects, some students, we've just been continuing to look for people to provide those services for our students. And so in that respect, the number, the ESSER funding, ESSER 3 for 23-24, that is the number or the amount that we anticipate spending for the students who have not received those services yet, as well as the positions in that office who are doing only that work. It's just a small number of people, one instructional specialist and two people who are temporary part-time, and are helping support parents with linking with two providers to provide compensatory services, and then tracking and monitoring, reporting data to MSDE on the completion of those services. In terms of the local budget, we have always maintained a small amount of money in our local budget for when there are compliance issues outside of compensatory services related to COVID. And so that revision to the chart of $100,000 is what we maintain in the event that, going back to the example of the speech pathologist, we may not have one, and we have to make those services up at a later date outside of the regular school day. So these are not services that we anticipate continuing, because our goal is to complete all of them before the ESSER funding runs out.
You'll just see me restraining my smile, but that's great news. Love. Okay, so great. That's great. Thank you.
Great questions and important. And just a reminder that if you haven't utilized, as I said in the last time, your compensatory services, you can still request them.
That is correct. The office, the individual who is monitoring those services, we have continued to reach out to parents who otherwise have not utilized those services for their students. We've also had some families who have moved out of the district, or students have moved in the district that have received their services. We contact that local educational agency and say, we have one of your students, provide them the services. Likewise, we provide services if a student has moved out of Montgomery County. We want to make sure that that student is whole.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Let's move on.
So the committee had requested additional descriptions of the allocation categories in the ESSER funding charts, and MCPS did provide updated charts. Those are attached as the first two attachments, circles 1 and 2 in your packet. The updated amount of total unexpended and unencumbered funds is 140.1 million. But more than that, also the charts do provide some additional description in each of the categories, which I think was the primary point of the committee's request in addition to that. So that again is there for your reference and information, and really just in case there are questions or other aspects that the committee wants to discuss on those.
Appreciate that. I mean, obviously, this has been a through line through the entire review of the budget, in that though there is ESSER money remaining, it has been allocated, and we had requested additional information, and so appreciate you providing that in a little more detail. There's important things in here, you know. Obviously, the big one that sticks out, I think that we've discussed before, is the mental health and counseling positions that has an FTEs associated with it of 43 FTEs. That's for social workers, the restorative justice coaches we talked about, and other instructional specialists, telehealth services. So obviously, something we're going to have to be looking at as we move into next year is how this list transitions when the money runs out. But colleagues, any specific questions on any of these items? Okay. Okay, quickly. This is obviously something we're going to be coming back to throughout the year, because all this will need to be transitioned. So.
Right. I just wanted to give you a quick opportunity if there was, you know, maybe one or two just top pieces on there that you expect our families are going to really want to see continued that we haven't already talked about. If you could just highlight those very quickly for us as you look through the list here. We've talked about some that we're not going to need to continue to fund with county budget, but if there's any that we haven't talked about, it would be great if you could just highlight one or two of us briefly of them.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, and thank you, Dr. McKnight. I'm champing at the bit here, council member, but the social workers. The social workers have just been a key, high leverage position and are fundamental at the nexus of our partnership with HHS and those Bridge to Wellness centers in the high schools. And they are part of that hub of when our student enters the student well-being team process and they're triaged. They are the social workers are the key, and they are that direct liaison to those external services that we're partnering with through HHS in all of our schools. We have gotten incredible feedback from our staff, from our principals specifically, and also our families around what the social workers have done. We strategically and purposely hired very diverse social workers, and we were strategic in putting bilingual and Spanish-speaking social workers in school populations with a large percentage of Spanish speakers. So they're culturally sensitive and proficient. And they are skilled clinicians in ways that we haven't had necessarily. That's their sole purpose. Unlike a psychologist who has to do testing, unlike a counselor who has a myriad of things they need to do, including academic support. I would champion for the social workers.
Thank you.
And another component I wanted to add to that was in 2019, when I so graciously came back to the district and was excited to do so, this was actually one of the initiatives that we started then, before COVID-19, recognizing that we didn't have a model and we needed to have some type of model to acknowledge wraparound services that are needed so that the school system wasn't working in isolation of just with counselors and others trying to meet a student's need for them to be successful. And as you mentioned, Councilmember Albornoz, who do we go to first? Department of Health and Human Services, right? Because we know they are a true component of that. So as we continue to think about ESSER, and you brought up a great point earlier, as we think about ESSER and how we're transitioning off some of the support that we've had, I would imagine we'll be working with Department of Health and Human Services as well to really say, what does that look like? Even when we had trouble hiring them during COVID-19, we actually worked with Department of Health and Human Services to help us make some connections, with contracting work to do that. So I absolutely see, as we continue the conversation around resources coming off of ESSER, for us to truly to be able to look at that as a cross-governmental opportunity to meet some of the needs that we've just been able to do with the ESSER federal funding.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this is I remember when we were sitting at Seneca Valley and you announced, we were outside because it was still COVID, that we were going to hire these 50 social workers. I think this is 43. We've got, I don't know what the exact number is today, but we made progress on that. Okay, so do you have something? Oh, yeah. Councilman Alvarez, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll be able to expand on this, but it's not just hiring, it's retaining. Because it's been like a revolving door in HHS. For understandable reasons, the caseloads are completely unmanageable. So it's something that, we'll need to think through moving forward.
Absolutely. All right, accelerators. Yeah.
So, council staff, so clearly the committee has had an in-depth discussion about a number of the accelerators within their context. What I did here was just reproduce for you the list of accelerators grouped by theme and area. I will clarify that that's my grouping, so it may not be precise, but hopefully is reflective of the nature of them. It's really just reproduced here as circles 3 to 5 of your packet in case there were questions about any that hadn't been discussed or any follow-up that was needed.
Appreciate that. This was very helpful to see in this way, broken out by the math and literacy, blueprint, human resources. So I want to, if there's anything the system wants to point out on this list or colleagues want to ask about in particular, but this is the list of the things that make up the accelerators. So Dr. McKnight, anything you want to, yeah, I know you could talk about all of them, but if there's anything you want to particularly call out, I mean, obviously, this is in the context of, we're making a budget recommendation today, and one of the legs of your stool, we've seen the stool, we understand it, is these accelerators, and if there's anything you just wanted to lift up briefly, give you the opportunity to do so, and then if colleagues have questions.
I'm prepared to respond to any questions, me and the staff, around any of the accelerators. They all are important. When you see them, some of them are there because of mere impact of the additional students that we have coming in, and they're all connected to specific initiatives and goals that we've already talked about over the last 3 sessions. So
Appreciate that.
any questions, we're ready to respond.
Yeah, and just in the math literacy bucket, 42 coaches and 40 teachers in English language development, 12 math instructional coaches, 2 elementary, 1 middle school, 2 math supervisors in the middle school and math. Obviously, it's an area that all of us want to see improve. There's a lot here. So the preschool education program, inclusive classrooms. So important things here, and appreciate this breakout. I think it's really helpful for the public to see. Any comment?
Councilmember Joando,
Yes.
one thing I thought about as well that I will point out for the accelerators, earlier when we were talking about that bucket on the stool, right? And so they represent $47 million. Mr. Hall mentioned this, but when we really think about in spaces where we have to cut, and when we look at the accelerators particularly, most of the more lucrative financial things that we can cut really does come down to staff. So we have, 40 ML teachers that are in our accelerators?
40.
40.
Yeah, I think I just said that.
Yeah, 40. Okay, so that's a significant amount of money in the accelerators versus a coach, or 2 or 3.
This is 40, 2 coaches, 40 teachers.
Exactly.
EML or ESOL.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the salary and things that are needed for those positions. When we talk about having to make a significant cut in that bucket, there's no way to avoid cutting into the classroom. If we tinker around the edges of the things that are accelerators that do not make up a significant cost, they're going to be very few things. So I just think that's something to consider as you have this conversation around accelerators, because the question always comes, what's going to cut into the classroom? well, if we're thinking about cutting a significant amount of money, it's going to cut into the classrooms.
Appreciate that. President Silvestri?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, as Dr. McKnight said, you know, when you look carefully at all of these accelerators, they're all necessary. But wanted to make the point that the board really was focused on literacy and math and fully funding our schools, staffing our schools, excuse me. And so just pointing out the math coaches were something that we really strongly believed and worked with Dr. McKnight to make sure that those were included. And of course, the EL, English language development, because that's literacy and math for English language learners, and it's just to meet enrollment. And then, of course, all the human resources, because as I said, we're a people organization, and it's not okay to have a skeleton crew running the operation. We really need it to be efficient and effective. So all of the blueprint, of course, is a requirement, but I just wanted to point out the board priorities around math and literacy and fully staffing our schools.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Mink, and then I'll go Councilmember Alvarez.
Thanks for that. That was what stood out to me as I was looking these over also, is how many of these are people, are staffing. And I think, you know, when we say accelerators, it sounds like these are probably, you know, programs and things we're trying out, but actually a lot of these are just really providing the staff and the people that we need to make sure that our students have access to all of the different educational and other opportunities. And a few that we haven't touched on, you know, 10 security guards. That's something that we've certainly heard from parents about, from community members about, and those fall under accelerators, those 10 security guards. Athletic trainers were not something that I knew about prior to going over this budget. You know, and my thought was, that doesn't sound, you know, super key, but I have now come to understand, I'll let you speak to this briefly in a moment, but these 26 athletic trainers are providing for the safety, the on-field safety of our students as they're participating in sports and in athletics. And, you know, like if we're seeing if a kid is able to go back on the field, for example, whether they had a concussion, if we don't have an athletic trainer there, we are not doing our due diligence on answering that question. So actually, it surprises me that we even are legally able to, you know, are able to call this an accelerator. This seems like something that should be mandatory, and it's also an equity issue, because at this point, we have some schools and some programs who have access for some students to those athletic trainers, and we have others that do not. And every student who's out there playing a sport where they could be getting injured, they need to be having that kind of very basic just health and safety oversight. So to me, that's another a key one that I think that we need to make sure that we're talking about. And then also the 21 facilities management positions, which I'll just mention because that one is not one that is very sexy, but that has to do with making our buildings run. So, you know, our building management folks, our HVAC, so we're investing in all of this infrastructure. We need the people to be able to make those things work and keep them up to date. And we don't have everything that we need right now, as I'm sure many students can attest. And so that is to address where we're falling short on that currently.
Thank you. Good points. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thanks. So just to confirm the numbers, Ms. McGuire, so this is, the accelerators would represent 211 new FTEs?
That's my math from the
Okay.
from the listing, yes.
Got it. And then the total, if you include everything, is 529.
539 of the, is the identified net increase in FTEs to the budget as a whole.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, we've accelerated our pace here. So I think we're to staffing now. So if we could do some musical chairs, I don't know if we have the music for it, but we could, so that our association partners can come up, and we'll move to the staffing component part. You want, go ahead and start, yeah.
And I'll just summarize briefly all of the information that's in this section so that we can proceed with the whole thing. So there's a bit of follow-up information here that the committee requested. Again, as was just noted, the board's budget adds a total of 539.46 FTE new. The table that's on page 5 of your packet just provides additional details about those new positions according to the classifications that are in the budget. So that's just, again, descriptive detail there. Similarly, in your packet on circles 6 to 7, which is in the attachments, that table, those tables, outline the full complement of positions throughout the budget in MCPS that support mental health and wellness. So that includes the social workers we were talking about and other similar positions. That table is there. So again, those are there for your reference. Wanted to just say a couple of quick words about staffing guidelines. The board's budget that document includes every year as part of the approval staffing guidelines, which form the macro budgetary levels of staffing that form the foundation of the budget. Those formulas and those guidelines, again, are the key underpinnings of how staffing is allocated at a very macro level. Those macro formulas, again, inform the budget, and the general education staffing guidelines are attached in your packet. There's a link to the special education staffing plan, which is, of course, more complex, but again, still is a foundational document for the budget. Certainly, those staffing guidelines are not reflective of every experience in every classroom every day, and that's due to a number of factors, but the primary one is, of course, the fluctuation of enrollment, where kids come during the year, and the general movement throughout the system that does occur every year, and of course, we've heard is occurring. I will say, too, that the budget typically, again, from the macro perspective, includes teachers that the system knows they will need to have more allocations as they get closer to the year. Includes positions that can be, because adjustments have to happen as those school enrollments, again, are realized at the beginning of the year. So it's a fluid process of trying to match positions to the enrollment as students come into the system. So at any rate, just wanted to make that general statement that, again, the formulas are there as a basis for the macro numbers, and then the central office works very closely with the schools to really fine-tune that as a process. The remainder of the section of information here is follow-up information that the committee requested on teacher vacancies and also on long-term substitutes.
Thank you, Ms. Squire. And we're joined by Dustin Jeter, who's representing MCEA, and Sally Murick, I see, from SEIU, and Andrew Winter from McCap, our administrators. So good to see you all. So as was mentioned, obviously, we were talking about this. Our schools are powered by people, and you all represent the people that power our schools, and we're thankful for that. So as far as this section goes, I'm sure colleagues will have questions, but I want to allow each association to make brief comments about how you see the staffing situation in the budget in the context of this budget. Start with you, Mr. Jeter.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Dustin Jeter, for the record. I'm a teacher at Francis Scott Key Middle School. I represent all of our educators, our members of MCEA, and I think for this particular budget, our concern and our hope and desire is that we're able to fully fund this particular budget because the needs of our educators and our students have for a long time been pushed to the side a little bit because of the dire situations we've been in. Prior to COVID, we were at a situation where our salaries, our resources, and the things that we need to do well by our students were not necessarily at a level that matched inflation. We're not necessarily at a level that matched what we need on a day-to-day basis in the classroom. And we soldier on. That's what our educators do. We soldier on the best that we can. And with COVID obviously being a major pandemic that definitely took a toll on not only our students but our workforce as a whole, we did the best that we could, and the system did the best that they could to provide us with the resources that they needed to be able to make sure that our students still were able to receive the education that they deserved. Now that we're coming out of the recovery, or into the recovery of the pandemic, it's certainly a necessity for us to make sure that we're able to continue to hold the hands of our students as they get through this period of time where they're trying to kind of regain what they may have lost previously, and still be able to achieve beyond it. And so our hope is that by fully funding this particular budget, it not only provides us with the tools and resources we need to make sure that our students are doing well, but it really, really helps to solve the two big issues that I spoke to you before at the hearing at the beginning of this process of recruiting and retaining great educators within our system. I'm a product of Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm a student who, was a student, came back to be a teacher, and live in our county because I trust our school system. And we really do need to make sure that if we want to bring in those educators to our county that can continue to fill the gaps. You see the numbers of vacancies, and those vacancies really end up playing a toll on the workload of our current educators because we're the ones who have to fill the gaps. And so our hope is that we're able to fully fund in that area. I know there's a number of questions that we could be able to answer for all of those. And really just thinking about our mental health needs of our students is also, key to the hearts of a lot of our students. We still have 35, psychologist vacancies within our school system. We have a number of social work, vacancies, as we heard earlier. And so the amount of money that's necessary to recruit those individuals and retain them will not be possible if we don't fully fund this budget. If we don't fully fund this budget, the associations will have to go back to the table with MCPS, and it's something that we have come to a great agreement. It's been hard work, but we've been able to do that, and it's not often you see us all sitting together saying, this is what we need. And so we're here saying that because we know that the tools that we need to help our students and also the tools we need to recruit more individuals to want to come here, even with the blueprint, we're fighting against inflation, we're fighting against cost of living here in Montgomery County. All of those tools can help to be met with fully funding this budget. So that's what our hope is out of this conversation. Thank you.
Mr. Jeter, appreciate it. Ms. Merrick?
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I appreciate being here. I'm Sally Murick. I'm the coordinator for the Paraeducator Program in MCPS, and I am one of the vice presidents for Local 500. First, I want to thank Dr. McKnight for her passion for understanding that it takes all of us to run this school system. We are a people business. Without the people, there is no business. I have a little different take on your three-legged stool. I've always said that it takes all three associations. You can't chip away at one of the legs because the stool is going to fall over. So you have to look at all three, SEIU, MCAT-McBoa, and MCEA. We all have to be there. I agree with my colleague that this has been tough times. We're all coming out of this pandemic, which none of us expected, and we certainly didn't expect it to last as long as it did once it did. Our adults, our staff have mental health issues, our students have mental health issues, our families. There are more and more challenges. We lost some students. Now they're coming back more than ever, and they're coming with more needs. We have more new citizens, new families to support, new students who have been possibly through trauma. There's just so many needs. We also still have our special needs population who has a great need. One of the accelerators from the blueprint is the expansion of full-day pre-K. As well as the pre-K, we also have a large number of small children coming to us with autism. And our need for our pre-K autism classes is going to just radically climb. Those all have to be staffed, and it's not just teachers. It has to be the paras, it has to be the support services, it has to be the buildings, the facilities that they're in. Right now, if you look at our vacancies, there's around 400 vacancies in support professionals. Half of them are paraeducators. A third of them are building service. If we don't keep our facilities clean and stocked and prepared, what does that say to our kids? It all ties together. And also, as what has also been stated, the neighboring jurisdictions around us, they're offering more. And it's hard to keep people here. And the price of rent, I know the council has been struggling with rent raises, and it all ties together, as we know. I would definitely ask, we must have the budget fully funded. We need to be able to pay our people, to attract them, to retain them. When you can go and work at a retail store or a fast food and make more than you can for working to educate our kids, that's a problem. That's a problem. And we have to look at that. And it's going to take all of us to look at that situation to figure out how to improve that. We have staff now who are full-time employed with MCPS who are living out of their cars. And this is just a fact. I'm not telling you something you guys probably don't know. Ties into Health and Human Services. How much support can we get from them? Because it's going to take the whole village to support our adults and to support our staff and to support our kids. I'll probably leave the rest for some questions, and I will stop there. But we are all being asked to do more with less.
Thank you, Ms. Muirick. I'll hold my comments till after we hear from Mr. Winter representing our administrators.
So, good afternoon. My name is Andrew Winter. I'm the proud principal at Ritchie Park Elementary School, also the McCap treasurer, and also, and probably most importantly, the dad of twin daughters at Quince Orchard High School who will be graduating next month. So I have a couple things I'd like to share. I've been in the county for about 2.5 decades. I've seen a lot of different things over my time here. I've led 3 different schools, Greencastle, a Title I school, Barnsley Elementary School with lots of special programs, and now I'm at Ritchie Park. And the challenges that I've seen over my time here in Montgomery County Public Schools, the issues have only grown. What's on a principal's plate, what's on a director's plate, what's on our members' plate has only grown over my time here. So in a recent example, last night, for example, I had to send out a message about a bear in Rockville, okay? I was at a lacrosse game and, was told all the schools in the Richard Montgomery cluster out of abundance of caution. It never stops. We're always on the clock, and our 800-plus members work tirelessly to support our staffs, to support our students, and support our families. We need this budget to be fully funded. Right now, principal salaries are 8th in the state. Okay? Even with the wonderful raises that we're anticipating, if it's fully funded, we still won't be number 1. Okay? We'll probably be 4, 5, or 6. It depends what's going on with other negotiations. But it's a step in the right direction. What I would say is, we use this 3-legged stool I've learned a lot about recently, for the budget. But I would take Sally's example and extrapolate it even more. The 3-legged stool doesn't just represent the budget. It represents the 3 unions, like she said, McCap, McBoa, MCEA, and SEIU. The 3-legged stool represents the learning progression of elementary, middle, and high school. The 3-legged stool represents, how should I say this? Students, staff, and families. The 3-legged stool represents good first instruction, interventions and supports, and social emotional learning. The 3-legged stool represents the coherence of the work from school-based personnel to central office to the Board of Education. And the 3-legged stool represents the decision-making of your committee, the full county council, and the Board of Education. So I would ask that you fully fund the budget because our members need that. We have less than 60% of our members living in Montgomery County. Less than 60%. And I believe MCA is just over 60%. So the funding that we need for our salaries and our benefits are essential for us to do the work. Because right now, I worry, will we find people to take our seats that are open to do the work that we need for our students? So thank you.
Thank you all, and appreciate the presentations and appreciate the work. It's important that you're bringing the voices of your members here, and as a part of this, we're really happy. I think I can speak for the entire committee and the council. We're happy that the negotiations are complete, and that you all have come.
In part?
In part, almost.
Not yet.
Yeah. Well, that the progress has been made. And the financial parts are complete. Almost. Yeah. And that you're sitting together, to your point, Mr. Jeter. That's I've been on this committee a few years, and that's not always the case at this time of the year. So we're happy to see that. I also appreciate the the context of what folks are going through. I was thinking, when you were talking, Sally, or, excuse me, I'll refer to you as your last name, but Ms. Murik, about the autism. I have a daughter who's autistic and who benefits every day from paraeducators. They're her favorite. They love her. She loves her teachers, but she loves her paras. I mean, loves her paras. And it gives me such peace knowing that she has them. So we have to value you and all of our educators. I used to work at the Department of Education, the U.S. Department, and the federal government only funds 10% of education, all education funding. We have a fundamentally flawed system where we rely on state and local government to fully fund. And what that means in a lot of states around the country is that you have horrible funding structures. We do better than most, but it's also very expensive to live here. And while we can't solve that at this council, we are certainly having to deal with that problem, right? Because I hear from our residents. They're like, my assessments are going up, and you want to raise my property taxes to pay teachers who are also struggling with the same inflation that I'm struggling with. And that's true. But what are we to do? We can't not support the folks who are supporting everything. The fundamental, the economic driver of this county and of this country is our education system. And I'm going to advocate like heck that we do more at every level of government, but we have to do our part here. We aren't dealing with the world that we wish we had. We are working towards it and dealing with the world that we have. And so I appreciate the context from all of you. I will turn to colleagues. I don't have any specific questions myself, but I'll turn to colleagues if they do. No? Councilmember May.
You have me choked up too. Okay. Yeah, in a moment, I wanted to just give you an opportunity, the folks who have joined us. We talked about ESSER-funded items that we might want to continue on the county budget. We've talked about our accelerators, and we kind of went through those sections. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity as we go back to speak to some of those, but also want to absolutely echo the sentiments of Chair Jawando as a former teacher myself, and somebody who, including working within MCPS, but who has worked with many wonderful and dedicated colleagues from our, my fellow teachers to our paras, to wonderful administrators. Everyone is there just laying it all on the line to get things done for our kids. Everybody goes outside their work hours. I for the record, don't support that. But, and in fact, I will just note that as a matter of equity, when this is teaching and working within the schools has been a primarily woman-dominated field for a very long time, and many of those female-dominated fields tend to be ones where we historically have said, these are folks who care, it's fine, they're going to go above and beyond because they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, and yeah, we're always there out of the goodness of our hearts. But it is not okay to take advantage of that and underfund those salaries as a result. And again, historically, where we see this is in the fields that are woman-dominated. It's not like there aren't men out there doing work out of the goodness of their hearts, but this is where we see it, in our schools, in nursing, things like that. And so I'm just going to note that this is also a matter of equity. We have seen the approval at full council of other union contracts that are dominated by men. We need to ensure that these contracts are fully funded, that also our workforces that is predominantly dominated by women, that have many wonderful women leaders, that those are given the same weight, the same importance, and the same funding priority. So this is absolutely an equity issue, but it also is just good policy for our students and for our communities. Everything starts with the schools, everything. Economic issues, workforce issues, health, public safety, it all starts with the schools. This touches every committee area. This touches every outcome that we want to measure around our community, around how well Montgomery County is doing. It all starts with our schools. Every issue, as far as I'm concerned, could be a joint committee meeting with the Education and Culture Committee. We don't actually want that. But the point remains that we have to ensure that our schools have what they need, or we're not going to have anything else. And ensuring that our schools have what they need starts with the people. So all of the other things that we need all of the programming, all of the things that so many of our families and our students love and that we want to see provided, none of that can fly, none of that can work if we have paras, teachers, counselors, administrators, social workers with untenable workloads and untenable caseloads. They cannot implement. They cannot implement. So step one, when we're not seeing results that we like, step one is looking at staffing. We cannot say step one. You can't skip over that part. So we have to ensure that we are protecting those contracts, and then we need to all of the other pieces that are necessary get built upon that. I get my question then. Returning to my question is, as we look back at some of the items that we're currently funding with ESSER funds that you all see on the ground as being particularly important that we transition to county funding. If you want to highlight a couple of those for us, draw attention to those, especially if there's anything that hasn't been mentioned yet, and or accelerators that we may not have touched on that are particularly you want to highlight that you're seeing on the ground, it would be great to hear from each of you about any of those. I'm not sure who'd like to start.
I can start, certainly. I think that I appreciate what you're saying because it's exactly what we see every day in the schools, and the fact of the matter is, we don't mind being held accountable for our responsibilities because it is a passion of ours to be in the classroom. And a lot of times I know the questions are, why do we need this much of an increase in order to keep our schools funded at the level we're asking? But the mere fact is, it's not just about the salaries. It's about we can't really even impact the day-to-day needs of our students without catching up from what we're missing. And that's what this budget has been able to do, is to give a lot of these resources and attention to the areas we need to increase our math and reading scores for our students and make sure that they can build on their levels that they are now as they continue to grow as students throughout their years in our system. So if you're asking for what areas are helpful in doing that, obviously our English language development areas, those coaches and those extra teachers that would be able to help really influence those students is going to be key in order for us to continue to build and boost their levels. And I point back to what I said earlier, the idea of the mental health crisis that we're in and trying to make sure our students are taken care of. We as educators, I speak from my personal experience in this, I can't do it as a teacher because I'm not trained to do it on a day-to-day basis. I've been asked to do a lot of that in the classroom. But having those extra social workers who can actually help as professionals who know what they're doing and who really can strive to meet the needs of our students, those additional social work positions are really key in doing that. The one other accelerator I would point to, I think that's really helpful for us as educators, is we do need that extra training to be the best that we can be. And so the additional consulting counselors and consulting teachers, providing that staffing specialists for central office to be able to help provide more resources and help for the educators who are in the classroom, I think is going to be key for us. We have so many educators we have a course that we offer for educators called Studying the Skillful Teacher, and we have so many who want to get into that course, and every year there's such a limit of how many can get there because we don't have the positions to teach it, because it's one of the first things we look to cut when we're trying to make those cuts. So when we talk about how important funding the full budget is, it all has trickle-down impacts for us because we feel the impacts, whether it's just, I shouldn't say just the salaries because we can't really fill the positions we have without having competitive salaries, but each of these programs provides another help for us as educators and really helps our students get to where they should be to succeed in our county.
Thanks.
So, thanks for the question. I think one of the key things to look at is what are we trying to achieve to get the results that you talk about? And we know results don't happen overnight. It takes time, and that's frustrating sometimes because we live in an instant age and we want the results instantly. And, you know, one of the things recently shared with administrators was the new Pathways to Success, which clearly outlines a progression of where we need our students to be. But to make that happen, if you look at the accelerators in the budget, having the added math positions is essential. Elementary schools don't typically have a math content coach. Principals may get creative in trying to create one with other staffing, but we don't really have it. And to have somebody who can coach schools and to coach teachers and work with staff development teachers in partnership is really an important accelerator. Another one I think about, when I started many years ago as a principal, we were just starting out with consulting principals. And having somebody who could be a thought partner or share their experience with me was really instrumental. And we've kept that through all these years. And I know we have a lot of new principals right now getting that support. In the budget, Dr. McKnight is proposing now consulting counselors. And with the mental health needs of our students, having somebody that a counselor can go to directly for support, for coaching, for advice, I would see as an essential accelerator. I think last Friday, my school did our kindergarten orientation. We had a wonderful event. We could easily tell, my veteran teachers could easily tell who's been in preschool and who has not been in preschool. Accelerating with the blueprint for more preschool is something that we really need as well. Because what happens is that first day of kindergarten, you have some kids who are coming in, who know their letters and sounds, who know how to read even. And then you have other kids who don't even know the letters in their name. So if we can have preschool more globally to align with the blueprint, that would be an essential thing. I think one of the challenges every school faces right now is there's an administrator in every building that the first job they do, I can guarantee you, each and every morning is look at where are we short with subs. And then figure out the puzzle for the day of who are we going to pull out of their job, whether it's a paraeducator, whether it's another teacher that isn't a homeroom teacher or has a certain amount of classes to cover the bills for the day, if you will. We need more subs. So those are some of the highlights I would point out. And, you know, your start of your comments radiated with me because I'm a girl dad, okay? I work in a school that's primarily a lot of women. And I go home, and my wife's a reading teacher, so I hear things from a different perspective. So I live education all day, and then I go home, and I hear things from my kids. Like they called me on the way over here about their AP exam and what questions they liked and what questions they didn't like. And then I'll go home tonight, and I'll hear about how my wife had to cover a class because they're so short, and she's a reading initiative teacher, not only a reading initiative, but she is a reading initiative teacher, and how she's not able to do what she should be doing because they have a teacher out right now. So, you know, consulting counselors, math supports, subs, helping us have the opportunity to meet the pathways to success, those would be some of the areas I would identify.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have all kinds of things. Of course. I'm going to start with first the CARES tutoring program. It has been so beneficial. I mean, its purpose is to close the achievement gaps, to help the interruptions that students have had in learning. Maybe they were slightly behind before, lagging behind before the pandemic, and then, wow, just things happened, or some kids were doing great before the pandemic, and then the whole digital thing didn't work for them, but there is a need. And it serves two purposes, well, actually three. It gives that direct instruction to students to help raise them up. By giving that direct instruction, you're providing social emotional help. That child is getting some one-on-one time or small group time with an adult that they respect and they know. And many of the CARES tutors are our members. Many are paraeducators. It is supplementing their income because they are not paid to work a full day. They're paid anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day. So I always advocate for at least 7.5 hours. I have a friend here who will, member here, who will say 8 hours for every parent. Because there is so much work to be done before and after school and learning and supporting of kids. But that is all things that need to be looked at. But the CARES tutoring has really done a lot of work in ways that they didn't expect it to work. The other thing I would talk about, as Mr. Andy mentioned, is that the permanent substitutes. Years ago, I've been around a long time, we used to have a program, Success for Every Student, and each school had a permanent substitute that showed up to work every single day. Remember that one? Mm-hmm. And they were put wherever they needed. They even covered a support staff. They would cover a para or secretary, whoever was out. They were your sub for the day, and they were paid, got benefits, the whole thing. We've done a little bit of that now. We really strongly advocate for permanent substitutes. Same thing. They need to be there so that exactly what Andrew mentioned, you got holes every day, 35 to 40% vacancy. The people are not picking up those substitutes. So every day, it's your first year crisis point. Who's not here? What do we have to do? Coverage. You can't even think of instruction till you get to coverage, psychological safety, physical safety, student needs. We're talking Maslow here. You can't have a classroom with 30 kids in there without an adult, right? So if we can get permanent subs that, okay, well, I know I've got Susan, she can go in there, and she's familiar with the school, she knows the kids know her, there's none of that nonsense of pulling something over on the substitute like we all know, because they know this person. This is a staff member in the school, and Susan picks right up with the instruction and keeps it going. I would also like to see more with the parent resource rooms. I think they are very beneficial. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of new citizens in our county, and they don't know how to advocate. They don't even know what to expect or where to go to get resources or how. And this is a way that they can come in and our staff can say, even though your child doesn't speak English, I think there may be some educational delays. Can we look at this? Or there's some behavioral issues. Or let me help fix you up with some other opportunities for the parents to help them. Because there are citizens, there are people that live here in the county. And odds are they're working and paying taxes. So this is their money coming back to them as well. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing? My daughters play sports. Amelia plays volleyball. Elizabeth, quite good at field hockey and lacrosse. And one thing that has helped both of them out is having access to an athletics trainer when they play their sports. And I know there's challenges with some schools not having them or having a stopgap for right now. But having athletic trainers and someone who can coordinate some of that work is really important also.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that. I'm doing the educational tour right now, and all the things you're bringing up, the coverage issue, when we meet with the principals, the administrators, they're running around trying to deal with that first thing in the morning. Councilman Robinos.
Thanks. So much has been said. I'll just be brief. I've enjoyed the hundreds of conversations I've had this year, the thousands of conversations I've had with all of your members over my professional career. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for all three of your associations. Your work is inextricably linked and critical. I also love seeing you all sitting at the table together because we know we will disagree at times, sometimes aggressively and passionately disagree. But at the end of the day, we're all on the same team and we all have the same goal. We're all coming at from different angles. And beyond the discussion that we're having right now on the FY24 operating budget, that work will continue immediately after we pass whatever it is that we pass. And the day-to-day work and the collaboration and partnership and alliance among not just executive branch agencies, but community-based organizations and many other partners and stakeholders, especially our parents and the youth themselves, that work will need to continue. And so I'm deeply committed, as long as I'm around, to help facilitate and foster those really important conversations, taking into account that the unique needs of a school system that are evolving literally every day. We just got notice that in the next several months to probably expect another wave of migrants coming from our Central and South America and our borders. And so we are all in this together. And whatever we pass today and whatever we pass at the end of this process is just yet another investment. And we need to already start thinking about FY24, and I'm sorry, FY25, because that process begins July 1st. And if adjustments need to be made as information changes on the ground, as we have done in the past, we will make those adjustments. So we are not bound completely by the structure that we are talking about today. There is some flexibility. And so, but we've got to weigh this with everything else, which is always the constant struggle. But I really just have the deepest respect for all of you, and this relationship is going to continue and strengthen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ramos. Okay, we have a couple more sections, and we have one special appropriation to deal with before we get to the grand finale. Okay, go ahead.
So jumping ahead then to page 8 of the packet, this section of the packet took some information that was provided in the blueprint implementation document that the school system has put together for the state, as well as a document that was put out by the Maryland State Department of Education regarding salary comparisons for positions across the state, and also a document that the system puts together every year that's very helpful. It's called the Staff Statistical Profile, and really provides a lot of in-depth information regarding employees in MCPS. So this section sort of combines information from all of those, and we'll just touch on them briefly in sections. First, I do want to highlight that the blueprint legislation includes 2 requirements for teacher salaries. One is that teachers must receive a total 10% salary increase over the 2019 salary schedules before June 30th of 2024, so that would be next year. The documentation that was submitted to the state does indicate that through FY23, the salary scale for teachers will have received a 7.8% increase. Therefore, a 2.2% increase would be needed to meet this requirement. And the blueprint also requires that the minimum starting teacher salary must be $60,000 before July 1st, 2026. And in FY23, the minimum teacher salary in MCPS is $54,038. Therefore, the minimum salary level does need to increase by just under $6,000 over the next 3 years to meet this requirement. I would say that as this packet was going to print on Monday, the school system and the MCEA did put out some information regarding their agreement, which does appear to impact these salary schedules, certainly in a positive way towards these requirements. So I just highlighted that happened. Also, the press release information is included in your packet, and certainly as this process continues, there will be more information. So as we go throughout this section, I do just want to highlight that this is referencing the current state and/or the information that was provided in the state document, which is older still. So the numbers should be taken for sort of relative and not actuals. I don't want people to look at them and think, oh, no, it's not, that's not the right number, because it might not be. Any questions on Blueprint? I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I just think it's an important point. I remember President Silvestri mentioned this at a previous session, that in the District of Columbia, I think you said that their starting salary is $64,000, and they have a $10,000 bonus, which gets you up to $74,000, and we're at $54,000 as our minimum teacher salary. Obviously, we have the blueprint requirement of a baseline of $60,000. The self-sufficiency standard is that's not it, obviously, for a family, if you have a family of 4, for example. And so we have, it's not some dissimilar to things that are impacting our community members at large. And so competitiveness with neighboring jurisdictions, which we talk about in public safety all the time. And, there was recently a $20,000 signing bonus approved for public safety folks, which I supported, but it's just, we need to have that in the context of this year to be able to recruit the best and brightest. So. And we have a statutory requirement to increase our salaries over time, and at the same time, while the state contributions will go down. overtime. So just important context, so. Anything? Okay.
Could I just chime in for a minute there? As we look at the teacher salaries, this is, in all of our salaries, this is a really important piece. You know, we know that the cost of living here in Montgomery County is higher. We know that we're the largest school system in the state, and we've got some really large schools, which can make it even a more challenging job than teaching already is. And so as we see all of the other school districts in the state achieving this 60,000 over the next several years, we are going to need to be well above that in order to maintain our competitiveness and allow our people, as was mentioned earlier, to be able to afford to live in the communities in which they serve. And so I just wanted to highlight, while the 60,000 is a great marker for the state, we in Montgomery County Public Schools need to be well above that.
60,000 here is not 60,000 on, on the Eastern Shore or somewhere else, yeah, so. That's, yeah, exactly. Okay, let's continue.
The next section just highlights, and we've discussed a little bit already about the residency, but that information is reflected on page 9 of your packet. The turnover rates are increasing. Again, this comes from the staff statistical profile, rising from 6.7% of employees in FY18 to 9.3% of employees in FY22. This does appear to indicate also that while retirements are staying fairly constant, this increase does appear to reflect other terminations. And MCPS also provided the table on page 9 regarding eligibility for retirements in the next 4 years. Now, obviously, we don't know who's going to retire, but certainly these are the folks who would be eligible.
When you say terminations,
I'm sorry, I should say just departures.
Departures, right, yeah.
I'm sorry, you're right. That's a poor word.
'cause I think this increase of roughly just under 3% in the last couple of years is indicative of, while the retirements have remained stable, of burnout, turnover, leaving the profession, things that I certainly have seen personally, and I know others have seen, and something we should be concerned about at a time when people enrolling in colleges of education is down. So that's something we'll want to watch closely. I know the school system will watch closely, but going from 6 to 9% in a matter of a couple of years, and people who are exiting the system, while not necessarily due to retirements, that's something we need to be conscious of. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a huge deal. I mean, we saw the efforts of all of you to scramble to try to get our schools re-staffed up at the beginning of this year, and what a struggle this was, and how, to your point about the subs, we haven't managed to solve the problem. And in fact, we're seeing people continue to go under very stressful working conditions that, again, it's a cyclical thing that's happening here. And so we have got to put in a stopgap. And this is something that from the days that I have been campaigning until now, this is an issue that I hear about a lot from families, is concerns about staffing in the schools. So we need to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. What we definitely don't need is to be starting off this coming year with even more holes than we saw this year. And I'm frankly very concerned about that. And I don't know how we defend that, as a county and as a decision-making body, unless we're saying we're doing everything we can to solve this problem, because it's going to continue to build on itself. Understaffing begets more understaffing because it's so stressful, and people leave because it's just not tenable from a capacity standpoint. Just briefly, if you would be able to speak to why we are seeing, from your perspective on the ground, why we have been seeing those numbers going up even as we're trying to repair the damage?
Sure, I know, from our lens as an educator, it's the compounded working conditions of dealing with our own personal health and well-being while also working with our students. And, the example that was brought earlier of the need to fulfill vacancies for substitutes, if you're not sure what happens when there is a vacancy that is not filled by a substitute, it's other educators, other support professionals, other folks who are in that building who pretty much cover those classes during their own planning time or during their own opportunities to, where they should be having other responsibilities that they're working on, they take the time to cover those classes instead. And so Doing that once or twice like we used to before the pandemic was okay. You know, it's, you know, every once in a while you might get called on and it's okay to do, but a consistent requirement for folks to do that makes it more difficult. You stack on top of that, you know, we talked a lot about the vacancies for educators, but I'm sure if we looked at the support, you know, the support positions that are also vacant, that means, you know, when I'm in a classroom and I'm counting on that, you know, paraeducator to be with me to help provide those services, and that paraeducator position is not filled, we really miss that person. It's one thing to just say it's a vacancy, but that person who's in the classroom, and we heard they're some of the favorite people of our students because they can care and attend to those students in a way that we, you know, that others might not be able to. So having those positions be vacant causes a workload issue that makes it harder sometimes for folks when they can decide to either retire or to move on to another position that might pay them for the level that they're educated, right? We have that wage gap of educators who aren't paid at the level that they've really in other professions that require that level of education of them are paying them. That causes an incentive for them to leave the system at a greater rate, and I think that's what we're seeing in that area.
Thank you, appreciate that. There's a comment from.
Yes, go ahead.
So I agree with what Mr. Jeter said. I think it's really all about work balance. You know, finding that right attention level work balance is really, really hard. You know, like I said at the beginning, you know, administrators are on call basically 24/7. You're never really off duty. Something happens, you're back in your building. I had this happen with a colleague yesterday where she was supposed to be on leave, and then there was a serious incident, and she's like, I'm going in. And she just felt obligated because you want to do what you need to do for your students. It's the same for teachers, it's the same for support staff. And I think the challenge is you can't go 80 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour every single day taking care of other issues. You wear so many different hats, from being a teacher to being a counselor to being a psychologist to you know, trying to find some way to incentivize the engagement that you need sometimes with certain students. And it's just an ongoing, it just doesn't stop. And I think the challenge with all that is figuring out a way, you know, I say this to some people sometimes, that what's on your plate over your career hasn't changed. It's only been added to the plate, but the plate's the same size. So you can't fit more food, you know, you can't fit more items on the plate, or you can't do it with fidelity the way you want to do it. So at some point, people do get burned out, or other things happen that they just like, you know, I'm going to go in a different direction with my career. So I really think we have to look at the work-life balance issues as well, and that compensation does help with that, and that's why fully funding is really important for that.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
I agree, they're just tired. There's just these absences, and not even the needs of what everyone has brought with them. Student to adult ratios matter. They matter in the classroom. They matter for the number of building service workers that are there to function and to properly clean and staff and stock a building. They matter for the front offices, how many secretaries are in there that can get the work done. That matters for counselors, it matters for teachers, it matters for everyone. If you're down a person, it's not just that there's an absent. You're down that ratio, you're down that support, which means you have to pick up more. And everybody's tired. And the biggest driver that's been coming from my members, during the pandemic, so many other commercial institutions were dangling big bonuses and higher pay rates, higher rates of pay of work. They're gone. They're going to go make more money because their families need it. So that has been a lot, and they don't have all the pressures that they were having here. They want to stay. They're committed to the kids. We want to do this work. But we need to have, we have the right to live as well with an appropriate wage.
Thank you, Sally. Important context, yes.
I just wanted to give one quick analogy. You know, I'm thinking about the Southern sayings that tend to resonate with people. And I think that Andrew, Sally, and Dustin did a great job of basically saying we have been robbing Peter to pay Paul. That is what it is. to take care of staffing shortages. We have been calling people, having in short-term and long-term subs, asking retirees to come back. People are helping us in the middle of an issue, and I am grateful for that. I truly am. But this is about how do we make a good step in the right direction to actually improve that for the stability of our system. Our children need people who are going to be there for a long period of time. They have to build relationships. They have to be able to be invested in the professional learning to build on that constantly. And so I think they have provided exemplar examples of how the structure, in many ways, probably long before we got here, was set up to rob Peter to pay Paul. And that does not benefit students, nor does it benefit the staff in what they need to consistently do their jobs well. And I do believe, as they've said, fully funding the entire budget helps us make a big step in the right direction to solve that.
Appreciate it.
Sorry, real quick. I just got some numbers about vacancies as of yesterday, and as of yesterday, there are 181 paraeducator vacancies. 181. That is very scary to me, and to the points that you all have been making. That when a paraeducator is out, it doesn't just affect that paraeducator and the students that they support. Now we've got other staff trying to fill in. We've got other, classrooms that are shorthanded as a whole. This is a critical issue. Thank you.
Important interplay between the salary and the vacancies and the workload. Important discussion. Let's continue.
So the next section, the next part of this section, again, references the state document from MSDE that, again, the full report is attached in the packet, but it gets hard to look across all the columns of steps and numbers, so I did compile a couple of charts on pages 10 and 11 in the packet. Just briefly, the first chart on page 10 does highlight the bachelor's degree minimum salary comparison, which we've discussed. MCPS in this chart is lower than 4 other counties in the state and very close to 4 other counties in the state. I would just say that, again, for simplicity, no county with salaries lower than Montgomery County are represented on either of these tables. And so this was really an attempt to look at those jurisdictions that do have salaries that are higher than MCPS. Again, as we've discussed, the bachelor's level salaries will need attention as has been discussed under Blueprint, and certainly as that level increases across the state. I would note also that the MCPS staff statistical profile does point out that 11.7% of all teachers are on the bachelor's level scale, the bachelor's level salary scale. Now, I would say that doesn't mean that everyone's at the minimum step, but the MCPS teacher salary scale is a function both of years of experience and of education. And again, 11.7% are on the bachelor's scale. The master's degree salary scale comparison does show a little more variation in terms of Montgomery County's placement in the state. That's on page 11. And I think what that shows is that, again, at those lower steps, there are a number of counties with higher and jurisdictions with higher salaries. Once you get past those first few steps on this master's degree scale, only Baltimore City is higher. And once you get farther up the scale, certainly the maximum salaries at MCPS are higher than anyone else in the state across the board. And so I think that, one argument for this structure has been that it incentivizes retention in the system to stay and to grow through the salary scale, and that it also incentivizes educational attainment. Again, certainly there are multiple considerations for what incentives are necessary going forward.
Thank you. Let's continue.
Can I say something?
Yeah, we're going to need to, very quickly, but we got to keep moving.
To get to those steps, you got to survive those first 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
If you don't have the supports you need for those first 3 to 5 years, you can have as many steps later on that you're number 1 in, but you're not going to get there. So I just want to make sure that.
No, it's an important point. I have heard from teachers anecdotally, like, you got it. There's too many steps, so it's something that not our purview to decide what the step system is, but as a former federal government employee, I understand it. So.
So skipping ahead then to page 12 of the packet, just provided a little bit of comparison also for administrators and principals. Again, there's certainly more variation among the jurisdictions. Things are a little less easily comparable, I think. But it does show that the Baltimore County has the highest principal salaries and is kind of an outlier in that group. MCPS principal salaries are also below Prince George's and Frederick, and more or less at the same level as Howard and St. Mary's. The supporting services employment employees piece, I would just note that those positions were not included in the state's document, so we can't make a comparison. But I did just want to highlight the information that we do have from the staff statistical profile regarding that. And you can see here, just trying to, 52% of the supporting services employees are within that range that would be between $19.61 per hour to a maximum of $29.54 per hour. Obviously, that's a big range. There are a lot of steps in SEIU as well, but again, just trying to show that cluster there. And then we do have, again, the average salary for 12 and 10-month support staff as well.
Very brief. Yes, go ahead.
I just want to note that the majority of support staff are 10-month. There are very few 12 months. So look at the lower number. That's very important to look at.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Sally.
I apologize. I do have one thing I wanted to also offer, just in terms of what Dr. McKnight said. We do have data on how our wages have changed when you adjust it for inflation. So I'll just, if I can share that with you all, and you can take that into consideration as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So the final piece in this section, there is an FY23 special appropriation before the committee today. And this is a good news appropriation, and it speaks to, as you've said before, Mr. Joando, bringing down state aid. So this is a good thing. The board has requested that the council appropriate state funding for the Educational Support Professional Bonus and Report Grant. The council did introduce this appropriation, and we have introduced it as a special appropriation because there's significant time urgency around the implementation. This is funding from MSDE to provide bonuses to non-certificated public school employees. That's predominantly SEIU members, and again, individuals who work in educational support positions without a teaching certificate. MCPS worked with the state to identify the eligible individuals, and the total grant fund amount for this is just under $5 million. Employees will receive a bonus of $464 in their final paycheck of the fiscal year. I would just say this is, again, scheduled for council action quickly because of the time urgency. I also would say, again, this is fully funded by the state, so that's good news, and we, again, do hope that the state would continue that.
Absolutely. We'd love for our SEIU members to receive that $464 at the end of the year. So without objection, I think we'll approve that. Let's continue. Oh, okay, no, you don't, yeah, here we go. All right. So, Dr. McKnight, you wanted to make a very, very brief comment before we do our recommendation on funding.
Thank you, Councilmember Joando, and I promise it will be brief. I just felt it was important before you have this discussion to kind of bring this all to the table. I'm so glad you all stayed here because, as they've said it, oftentimes we're trying to figure things out and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum on it. You won't divide us today on these issues, not at all. And so they're here, and we recognize the importance of what we need to do as a crew, I'll call us, of educators who are going to be relentless about this moment in time, and we won't ever get this moment again, about what we need to do to fund our educational infrastructure in Montgomery County Public Schools. And I want to say, after everything that was said today, I look at you have a tough decision. I understand. Myself and the Board of Education, we have tough decisions to make all the time about the needs of the over 162,000 students that we have to serve. And for that, I want to say I acknowledge that. We've tried our best over the last 2 sessions, this one being the third, over 10 hours of discussion to really impress upon you the real life experiences of what's happening in our schools. And I hope that we've done a good job of that. In that tough decision, I just want to say 3 things to remember in that 3-legged stool. Students continue to come to the school system with different needs, and they are continuing to come, and we must serve them. That's the first leg of that stool around enrollment and inflation. Our teachers need what they need. Our staff, every single one of them, need the professional development and the support that they spoke about to do their work successfully. That's also what makes them stay. Those are the accelerators. And then third, we have to pay them and give them the respect that they deserve to be those educators who are doing the hard work of serving our students. We cannot choose. I can't see how we can. And today you're going to make a statement too as you make the hard decision, right? You're going to make a statement about the legacy of the school system. And I hope it's one that we all can be proud of. I know it's tough, and I know that there are many needs across the system, but Montgomery County Public Schools has a responsibility to continue to be greater than it ever has been before. And all of us are equipped to make that happen. But we gotta have the funding to do it. And so I implore upon you, ask you to make that decision, recognizing that we are the economic engine of this community. And I also ask you to help us be more accountable by giving us the resources that we need to actually do the things that you, the constituents, and we all want to do. So I want to thank you for the time to share our stories and our perspective around this budget.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight, and thank you to our association partners. Thank you to the board members. I know I meant to acknowledge, I saw board member Julie Yang and board member Trevor Evans and board member Gracie Rivera Oven, and I don't know if there's, Brenda's behind. Okay, there you go. That's the problem with this room. You can't see that front row. And board member Brenda Wolf and all the others and all the MCPS employees and staff and community members who are here standing up for multiple hours. I appreciate you doing that. As we mentioned at the beginning of our taking this budget up, what this committee will do is make a recommendation of the funding level, right, to the full council. And the way this budget is going, which is a little unique this year, that everything above the FY23 funding level will go on the reconciliation list in two categories, either high priority or priority. And that will go, some things aren't making it at all, right? We've been through multiple committee sessions. Some things have just been totally removed, and we'll talk about that in a second, and won't make it onto the list to even be considered. So it's important. And then the council will consider, the full council, and MCPS will be discussed on May 12th, will take up the recommendation of this committee in the context of everything else that's on the list, right? And as of yesterday at 5 p.m., it's probably higher now, there was $75 million of items on the high priority list from across committees, not including MCPS at that time because we hadn't made our recommendation. And we all agree how important the school system is to everything that we want to do here in Montgomery County, to our students and our families. The first issue I want to bring up is the issue of the fund balance, which you all addressed at the beginning. We talked about this last year in the previous committee, and it was something that there was back and forth, and there was analysis, and there was some confusion about you all actually have to come to us to ask to use the fund balance, which there was confusion about that, but that is what actually does happen. Councilmember Mink had mentioned, as you referenced, trust us because we are the backstop. We have the reserves, which are at the highest levels they've ever been, thanks to fiscal management of this council, to be a backstop for the school system as we are supposed to, if in the case of unprecedented events, as you've mentioned. And in this type of year where we are really struggling, it's my view that while you should and legally have to have some fund balance, that it doesn't need to be that high. And so one of the things that I'm going to propose is that as a start, so that the committee can do its work, that we would reduce that fund balance by $22.3 million, which lines up to about 1% in the property tax increase, because obviously we're not the GO committee. We're not going to make a recommendation on taxes, but we know that the way this budget was proposed, they are inextricably linked because the county executive sent it to us, tying the tax increase to education funding. So I want to first propose that and see if colleagues have any comments, but the first action we're going to take is to reduce in the amount of the appropriation by $22.3 million in light of the fund balance conversation. Any comments on that?
No, I think it's reasonable, and I think it's necessary. We have some difficult decisions to make, and in a moment I'll provide my holistic comments, but on this specific category, we are partners and allies. We know where each other lives, and so we can make adjustments as necessary and on an emergency basis if necessary. And I think that gives us a little bit more wiggle room, which in the context of this budget would be extremely helpful. So I concur with the chair's recommendation.
Councilmember May.
I do as well.
Okay, so then, just for council staff, so then that would be not go on, that would be a reduction. In my view, there's been a compelling case made for everything that has been requested. And it is I often talk about the duality of Montgomery County. We have to be able to live with, we're a great county, and we've got a lot to improve. And you have to be able to hold those things at the same time to be here in our county. And so I say in that, similarly in that vein, I know the school system could use all of this funding and needs it to support teacher salaries, educator salaries, and the accelerators and programs. I believe that, personally. But I also know that we have difficult decisions to make in the budget that we're going to consider at the full council. And so what I'm also going to propose is that we would put the remaining request, realizing the county executive did send us something that was 99.8%, not the full request, but the $8 million, but the remaining request that came to us on the reconciliation list, but in 2 tranches. 7 tranches, which would total $156,417,575 as high priority, and the remaining 2 tranches, which would total $44,600,000 for a total of $201,017,575 on the priority list as well. So what that would mean is that we removed the fund balance. We just talked about why, that the school system has carried from year to year, and that the remaining, which is equivalent to roughly 9% on the property tax increase, would be put on the reconciliation list, but in 2 tranches. 7 of it designated as high priority, 2 designated as priority. Again, and that would go to the full council. And I will tell you, in past years, the way the reconciliation list works, there are things that are on high priority that aren't going to make it. There are things that are on priority that will make it. All of it goes to the full council, and we are 3 of 11 that will decide what comes off the reconciliation list. I can say personally, I will be fighting for all 9 tranches. But I think it's important this committee sends a clear message that we see the funding as a priority, all of it, but that we did do our work to try to help the overall budget situation in light of the fund balance conversation. So that's the recommendation I'm going to put forward on behalf of the committee, and I would welcome my colleagues' comments on that or anything. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you. I appreciate the recommendation. I think it's reasonable given the circumstances. I'll just add a few things. The first is, we're going to be back having this conversation again in about 9 months. And there will be work between now and then leading up to it. And so the priority for me, and I know for all of my colleagues, is ensuring that the compensation is commensurate with, for all the reasons that have been stated, so that can advance and keep us competitive. The accelerators and the additional programs, which are critical, there's no question about that. But The reason I joined this committee and changed from public safety is because in the previous 19th council, it was tremendously beneficial to have Councilmember Rice on both committees. The HHS and the Education and Culture Committee in the 19th council, it will be different in this one because we split up Fed, but in the 19th council, we had more joint committee sessions than any of the other committees because the work is inextricably linked. And over the last 3 weeks, we've gone through the exact same painful conversations and exercise in going through supports for our senior population, supports for our disability community, supports in the area of food security, and key areas that directly impact the families that all of us are trying to serve. And tough decisions are going to have to be made there as well. And so we have to think about this, in my opinion, holistically. And that's why this gives the 9% a chance to entirely go through, but it will help colleagues in the context of looking at that entire picture, which I think is the appropriate thing for us to do as a committee. So, and this conversation will continue, which is obviously really, really important. So just wanted to make those comments, and I agree with the chair's recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarez. Councilmember Mink.
So, you know, we have tough decisions to make in a week from now also. This is moving to the full council for a full holistic conversation along with, you know, in partnership with HHS and with the other, you know, departments who have, you know, their work to do as well. And it's important for us to have all of those pieces before us as we have that conversation. So, you know, as Councilmember Albornoz had said earlier, there is some flexibility as we have those conversations. But regardless, there's going to be difficult decisions that we're going to have to make. And so I think I concur with my colleagues. This is one of those, a step on those difficult conversations that we're going to have. I look forward to be clear, having those conversations over this coming week as well as we're moving towards reconciliation, because as has been mentioned, we have a lot more coming to the reconciliation table than we're going to be able to keep. So there's going to have to be changes made, and there are going to be things that are high priority that don't advance, and there are going to be things that are priority that do advance. And so between now and then, and I will say as a new council member, the fact that now we've got a week to get that sorted out is wild, but that's the task that we have before us. We will be having, I certainly will be having a lot of conversations with you all, as well as with our partners in other departments, to figure out where we should be landing at full council and to work with my colleagues to make sure that we get everybody there. So I think that there's a lot more to be discussed about the details of what these different funding levels mean for MCPS. So I look forward to kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of that with all of you and with our colleagues.
Thank you. So we have a 3-0 committee recommendation to send the full 9 to the full council, full 9 increments of 22.3, 7 high priority, 2 as priority. We will have a full discussion next week at the full council. And I want to say thank you to our partners, to the system, to our association partners, to everybody. I've never been more hopeful. I was talking to Craig Rice the other night, my previous chair, who we never had to do what I'm doing right now. And I said, thanks for giving me the job at this moment in history. But, you know, we have to work together to answer the call. This is a once-in-a-100-year catastrophe we're coming out of, which exacerbated problems that were already there and just made it worse. And we have to address it together. And I'm confident we will, because we all want the same thing for our kids. So appreciate that. And Ms. McGuire, you clear of the committee's recommendation?
Absolutely.
All right. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.